It was very nice. Good weather.
Long time no see. Oh, I thought you were talking to me, sorry.
I did a marriage overnight. Yeah. First thing yesterday morning, and the text me
Oops.
and says, it turns out we need a copy soon to get to the health insurance things, so they asked me to check in on what the turnaround is.
If he calls, we could probably get it done by the end of the week, and he could even actually come in. Kind of saves a lot of time
I was
through the mail.
supposed to come in on Friday.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect, yeah, sure.
So, this is a donation that was dropped off.
Oh, thank you. Who's it? How much? That was nice, Charlie Vindo. $250, sweet. There you go.
Thank you.
Could you probably have this?
Yeah,
Do you?
I received it, yes.
Madam Clerk, could you PDF this and send that to the entire council tomorrow, just so they have it? It's just that FEMA watershed project stuff. I figured you might just want it, maybe. Sir, we actually have a buyouts update on the agenda. I know that's why you're here. It's under 8B on the agenda. We'll probably get to it. If I had to guess a little bit, we'll get to it about 30 minutes into the meeting. I can put you on during visitors and communications, but it might be helpful for you to stay or at least hear the buyouts update, and then if you want to speak then, that's fine. What would you like to do? It's up to you. Okay, all right, that's fine.
I used to come once a week, it was 7 o'clock, now I guess it's changed to 6 every other week.
Hey, Sam.
Charlie Walter Taylor can't join.
Took me a while to get used to it too, but I have to admit I was an advocate for 6 o'clock, only so we get home at 9:30 instead of 10:30. It's not quite as long a day.
This is,
So, council, I believe we have
I don't think it's
a minute. We do.
It's by cow pasture,
There we go.
and it's mostly, it'd be nice if it was.
Okay, all aboard. It is Tuesday, August 6, 2024 at 6 p.m. I will call this regular meeting of the Barre City Council to order. Manager or council, do you have any adjustments to the agenda?
None for me, Mayor.
No? Okay. Under visitors and communications, is there anyone wishing to address?
I'm sorry, Mayor, if I did realize we will have an executive session, as I emailed the council for personnel and real estate.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, not a problem. Thank you very much. Got it. Under visitors and communications, is there anyone wishing to address the council regarding an item that is not on the agenda? Okay, hearing and seeing no one, council will move to the consent agenda. That consists of the approval of the minutes of the regular city council meeting of Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024. Are there any permits and/or licenses?
no,
Madam
there are,
Clerk?
no.
Okay, there are none. We have no contracts. Item B would be assigned state operating funds as fiscal year 25 revenue, assigned 24 unexpended funds as fiscal year 25 undesignated fund balance up to 5%, and approve a $50,000 transfer to the capital improvement fund. Item C would be approve creation of a special fund to track flood expenses. Item D would be approve waiver of vacant building fees for flood-impacted properties. And item E would be approve the amendment to the grants management policy. Yes, sir.
Just for record keeping, it's the lettering, everything you read is correct. The lettering is just different on the packet.
Yeah, well, we didn't have, there's nothing under B and nothing, so technically there was no B or C.
Okay, yeah.
So I started, so in my mind, D became B.
I see what you're saying.
And yeah, because there weren't any items there for consideration. Yes, sir.
I would just like to have council be aware when there's a vacant building that they're going to be waived with the fee
Yep.
or the scheduling of any of that.
I think we are.
Okay.
Because we do get a copy of the permits that are issued in
Okay.
your packet.
Okay.
Every week.
Yep.
So whether there's a fee charge, I don't know that it would specifically say waiver, but manager could make, yeah, he could just make the permitting office aware of that.
Yes.
Sure.
So they can just put a little notation waived or something like that.
Yep.
So then you'll know it's flood impacted.
I had someone reach out that was, just wanted to make sure that the businesses that were being were being waived properly.
Gotcha.
They wanted to make sure that, like the Newberry building and some
Of
other
course,
things. And we know that that's not the case, but they also want to make sure that there's transparency with that. So they were just curious.
Yeah, I think that one might have been registered earlier, and because our downtown was flood impacted, I think it would kind of be on a case-by-case basis. So I can't sit here and tell you that the fees wouldn't be waived.
Right.
Can't tell you that they'd automatically be waived, but I do know the permitting office has a great handle on that. Could we talk a little bit, you knew this was coming. And listen, I don't have necessarily an objection in light of our current fiscal situation from the flooding. I don't have an objection with assigning the fiscal year 24 unexpended funds as fiscal year 25 undesignated fund balance, because I think we're going to need all the help we can get. But I did have, I read about the city, we had budgeted $1 million for, that we were getting from the state for flood relief. We ended up getting $1.05 million.
Correct.
So I'm just questioning the timing of the transfer to the capital improvement fund. And my question would be, would we be better off sort of keeping our powder dry, putting the 50 in the undesignated? We could always circle back around, and I'm not saying I wouldn't support putting 50 into capital, but I'd feel better putting that 50 into the undesignated and keeping our powder dry a little bit.
Yeah, I think that would give us more flexibility, and Dawn's on and she can jump on to correct me if I misspeak. I think certainly the assigning of unexpended funds, we don't expect many, if any, at this point. This is sort of as the mayor mentioned, this is in case there is, after we receive FEMA funding, any sort of fund balance left, we're going to need as much as we can get in FY25. So I don't want people to think that we're moving $743,000. That's not happening. This just gives us sort of the preemptive authority to do so.
We are not anticipating.
We're not, yeah.
We are not anticipating being on the right side of the
Correct.
ledger on June 30th.
Yes.
So it's totally preemptive. I said, I'd just like to keep the powder dry.
I
with the
think, and
50.
I'm looking at Don, unless you see an objection. I know we do have, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, so to speak. We have needs on the general fund side, we have needs on the capital side, so there's certainly rationale for doing it both sides. I don't have a particular objection to doing that, and it looks like Don doesn't either, so I'm fine
We're
with
okay
holding
with
off
that?
on.
Yeah, and my
third
thought, Don,
action.
is just that we can't do capital to general, but we can do general to capital. Okay, you agree with that?
Yep, totally fine.
Okay, perfect.
So we'll strike the last
So
part
we
of that
would-
motion.
So we would not approve the $50,000 transfer to the capital improvement fund. So they're amending the consent agenda. And you want to help me out? Anybody want to help me out procedurally? Because it was worn that way. So we'll have to ratify that. Just put it on
Yeah.
again next week, drop the last sentence, we'll put
And
it on
then-
for ratification.
And if Don, if you know the answer, I don't think we need a specific action to have the 50,000 be undesignated fund balance. It'll just be,
No, because it's anything in
Perfect, that's what I
excess of
figured.
5. So,
Yep.
so you'd be covered that way.
perfect.
Awesome.
So we'll ratify this next week.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions, council? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Thank you very much. Item 4A, council, is to approve the city warrants, ratify the warrants from the week of July 31st, 2024, and approve the warrants from the week of August 7th, 2024. Is there a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, is there any abstention? Yes. Yes, noted. Thank you very much. City clerk and treasurer, it's all yours.
Getting them.
Oh, I'm sorry, no, take your time.
Okay, so for this week, our focus in my office will be the August primary. We have our list of volunteers, well, not volunteers, but non-BCA members who will be working the polls. We have our BCA members working the polls. I have a few I need to switch around, and they're both right here in this room, I think.
Sorry.
No, actually, Michael and Amanda, you both can't do the shift, and they're the opposite of
Oh.
each other.
Great.
Would that work?
What time does?
Trade.
yours-
She was
3?
for the 2:30.
Yeah, I have to do the afternoon now.
Yeah,
Have to do the afternoon now or the morning?
I can't do morning.
Okay, and you can do.
I'm
what?
working 6 to 2:30 at the school.
Okay, so scratch that out.
Okay, so.
So close. I thought I had it. So anyway, so we'll get that one ironed out. Our absentee ballot request is up to 652. Returned less than half. We got 326 back. We're really hoping that people will start dropping them off in the ballot boxes this week so we can get them lodged as returned and accepted. It gives us time to review them, make sure things are signed, make sure that there are 2 ballots in the unvoted envelopes and the 1 in the voted. And it also gives us time to contact these people and give them opportunity to come and correct those mistakes. If they didn't sign the envelope, they can come in and sign it. If they put the wrong envelopes in the wrong, or the wrong ballots in the wrong envelopes, they can come in and fix those on their own. It gives us time versus waiting until election day and hoping they have that 12-hour window to do it. Other than that, we're doing good on the elections. And we've been working on the tax rate, but that is coming up later in the day, in the night, so
It
I
is.
will leave that for then.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions, council? Thank you very much. Is there anything under liquor or cannabis control?
Not at this today.
With an impending storm watch, maybe there should be. I digress. Mr. Manager, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple updates for the council. So just updates on the recovery efforts from this year's flooding event. So the debris collection, the dumpsters that the city had put out have been removed due to just, we had sort of run its course of materials been put in them. So they are no longer out. In contrast with last year, there hasn't been any curbside pickup of debris by the city, just because of the volume was different, and we're not expecting the state contractor to be in Barre City. So residents who do need assistance should contact the relief groups at the auditorium. That's their best avenue at this moment to get the most immediate help for any debris issues that they may have. The auditorium is in standby mode. It was preparing to stand down until the forecast, which I'll get to in a little bit, but there hasn't been anybody using the auditorium as a shelter. It's just sort of on an alert status. The relief groups continue to be set up in the room. We've provided room to some of them to operate out of Alumni Hall as well. The Multi-Agency Resource Center, the MARC, continues to be open Mondays and Fridays, and we know they'll be there at least through next week. That may change, but we know Mondays and Fridays, at least through next week, there'll be resources here in the city for people who continue to be impacted and need assistance. From code enforcement, we're down to 2 red tags. One is a foundation issue that was poured, so that's hopefully be coming off the list shortly. The other is the home on Harrington that had a structural fire, so that's a long-term red tag. And the people there unfortunately had been displaced already, so it's not a new displacement of residents. As I alluded to, we keep hoping the forecast is different, but we are unfortunately bracing for another round of very heavy rain from the remnants of the latest tropical storm. We don't have specific forecasts yet. We are unfortunately preparing for the worst again. So I just encourage residents at this point, if you don't follow the city website, to favorite, bookmark it on your phone, bookmark it on your laptop. If you don't follow the city's Facebook page, follow it, like it, so that it's in your feed. And if you haven't signed up for VT Alert, this is a really great time to do that too. We are, as the council knows, we contracted our own messaging system, which Chris is helping me with the implementation of. We're hoping to have it online by the end of the month. But so that will be another way for us to get to people. But right now, all I can say is to encourage people to make sure they have a way of getting updates from the city. We are, like I said, we're going to have a little bit more information as we get closer to the storm. It's just not looking promising at the moment, but we don't have anything concrete to share at this moment, other than what people are also seeing on the news as well about the potential track of this storm. On the positive side, you may have seen that yesterday we announced a partnership with the Bennington Martins, which are the pro team here in Vermont. They are going to be in the auditorium on August 31st for most of the day. They're going to be doing a skills clinic in the afternoon for kids, I believe, from grades 5 through high school. And then they're going to do an exhibition game at 8 p.m. versus Barre First Responders. And all proceeds are going to the Barre Community Relief Fund. So this is a great event that they reached out to us about. We're very happy they're coming here. And so I do encourage you, if you're interested, go to our Facebook page or website, go to the Bennington Martins Facebook page for all the information. Really great to have them in Barre doing this to help our community.
Sorry, could you just repeat the date?
Sure, August 31st, Saturday, yeah. And so the skills clinic will be in the afternoon, and the exhibition game is at 8 p.m. So they're gonna have from what I understand, a lot of nice things in the intermissions. Luckily, they're gonna have mandatory timeouts every 4 minutes of gameplay. So they're gonna try to recognize people in between and do fun, contests and to get people excited. So it'd be nice to fill the auditorium for it. They're making their way here, and so it'd be nice to be there as a community.
And is anyone taking bets?
It could be a good fundraiser.
Interestingly, online sports betting is legal.
Yes, I know.
It probably wouldn't be hard to get a platform.
So we're very excited about this. We're trying to fill out the team now. It'll be filled out with members of police, fire, and public works. So we're recruiting deep into our bench to find people who will play this game. So
Will you be playing?
it's a TBD. TBD. And then finally, just we continue to work with state, with Pat Moulton and Down Street on the EPA grant. So we've had a lot of back and forth this week. Worked with Angie on the partnership agreement, so we're in good shape there. And then I've been working with Angie's team on some of the legal documents they need for the application, like they need proof of site control for things like WABI and so forth. So we are working away at that. Talked to Pat this afternoon, expecting submission to the technical assistant team by tomorrow. That'll trigger a chance to get an initial review and then obviously an official submission later on in the month. So that work continues as well, and Pat has been doing a good job and Angie and her team have been doing a good job keeping that moving. So that is it from me.
Questions? Yes.
I was wondering about the house that partially burned on Laurel Avenue. Is that going to be repaired, do you think?
I believe that one of the units is going to be a longer-term fix. The other two, I think, had just water damage, so they'll still need a little bit of remediation. But fortunate, it's a 3-unit building, And I believe just the one where the fire was concentrated is maybe lost, but the other two should be online, is my understanding.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
On the debris removal with the dumpsters being gone, we had talked in the past about eventually the city will be able to do rounds and collect up trash. Is that still in your plans, or?
Not at the moment. I think as we've observed and our crews have observed around the city, there isn't sort of a scale for that yet. It's very, very isolated pockets that we're seeing. So the easiest way at this moment is to go through the relief groups. I know Barre Up last year, actually Adam Jacobs through the volunteer coordination had worked a way to get some of that done. So that's the best option at the moment. We're just not seeing the concentration at scale to make it efficient for the crews to get out.
And they're up at, the relief crews are still there every day, or just when the market?
The Red Cross should be there every day. I think that people can reach Barre Up every day. The Mark is there just the Mondays and Fridays. But I think if the Southern Baptists also have some office space at the auditorium, so those are all good resources for debris assistance if needed.
Great, thank you. And then the other thing was, hoping that the storm changes course, but has all of the identified like culvert blockages and like I know the dumpster's gone on Berlin Street, but are the ones that we knew?
Yeah.
Are they all gone?
Yeah, the blockage, so all the trash racks have been cleaned. Berlin Street's bridge has been cleaned. We actually have staged the loader with a thumb there just
Yeah,
for
That is
to
the
be
city one, I
prepared.
saw it there, yeah.
Yeah, so we have, I mean, at this point, might stay there the whole summer, unfortunately, but it is staged there. Brian's team, the DPW team, has been doing, catch basins as they can, also to just keep constantly hitting the high danger spot. So the big blockages though have all been cleaned. So that's Brook Street. If you saw that after the flood, that looks like a dam.
Yeah.
I mean, it's doing its job, but it looks like a dam. So that was cleaned up right away, and then Berlin Street was the next one, and that was gone. And all we have other trash wrecks throughout the city that.
Like the culverts and stuff as well,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, and so we actually, after last year's storm, our DPW created they built in-house new trash racks that are angled at a specific way, so the debris sort of washes up over them. If you remember, the trash racks used to be sort of more perpendicular to the ground. Now they're at an angle, so what's happening now is that the water's pushing the debris up off of them, so they're sort of self-cleaning. But when we do go around to them, it's easier to grab the machines and just scrape it right up before they had to sort of pick it up and grab it. Now they can just sort of scrape. So the trash racks have been performing better this year.
And last one, the tree on Brook Street by Maple and Brook, the 92 Maple Ave tree
Yes.
that we had talked about.
Yes.
Actually, when you were talking about the storm forecast, that was another red flag that went up.
Yeah, let me follow up on, I don't have anything new on that one.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I think there was a question here first.
So, have we been able to suck out the stormwater drains all through 3rd Street, 2nd Street? I know that the continued water and then all the debris that's in those, has that been continued to be cleaned up?
They've been doing, yeah, so the DPW has basically been prioritizing all of those hard-hit areas since the July 10th event. So they've been making those rounds on North End, Vine Scampini, just the problem children, so to speak. So they've been focused on those, yes.
And if there's someone that has a drain that needs to be done, how should they reach out?
They should call the Public Works office, so they'll get Debbie will jot it down, and we pass those along to the crew through Brian, yeah.
Justice Stockwell?
As you know, I'm worried about the clear cut behind Highgate ending up on Railroad Street. So do you feel like there's enough drainage there to keep as much of it there as possible, that it's working well?
Working well, I mean, working adequately is probably what I'd say at this point. I think that unfortunately, there's a lot of places like that could be better. Whether it's improved before Friday is maybe not possible, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just a quick one, we got an email, you and I got an email from Pat mid-afternoon. Do we need to get together on that tomorrow morning?
We can, yeah. Yeah, I talked to her about that as well.
All right,
So
just give me a call when you're in.
Mr. Mayor.
Get going.
Online.
Oh, I'm sorry, Amy?
Yeah, I was just gonna put in a request for some street cleaning on the lower part of Berlin Street, unless it happened today. There's a couple inches of silt and sand on either side where, the road meets the sidewalks. I think Lower Berlin Street missed the street cleaning last year because the bridge was closed for so long that I don't think the street cleaner could turn around, but, I try before every storm to walk around and pick up litter and whatnot, but I'm pulling litter out of several inches of mud on either side of Berlin Street. So if there's street cleaning equipment clear, I would
By
ask
the-
that I have
by
a
the bridge,
run
Amy?
on Berlin Street, and as of a couple days ago, there was grass growing out of the storm drains on top of the Berlin Street Bridge. They're very narrow and they get smaller, and it all heads to the low point in front of some people's houses who keep flooding. So maybe if something happened this week and I missed it, but as of this morning, there was still a lot of, I can't even keep up with picking up the litter. I pull it out and it's in 2 inches of mud on either side of Berlin Street. So just a plea for some street cleaning there.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, we'll send crews there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, then we will move on to new business. Item A is the River Program Mitigation Projects Update. Welcome. Chairs haven't gotten any better. Sorry.
Sure. That's Keith Cubbin from CVRPC, here for the river program. I do the emergency management planning there, and going to introduce the rest of the team here today.
Hey everyone, Roy Schiff again, Water Resource Engineer with SLR Consulting.
Will Pitkin, Planner at CVRPC.
Alex Marcucci, Water Resources Scientist with SLR Consulting.
All right. Let's see, I sent a couple slides up.
Let me know which one you want, because I know we have a couple of
I think we're going to start with the historic slides.
historic. Okay, let me get back out of this.
Once I get out of there.
These ones?
Yeah, perfect.
So the historic slides, basically the idea of these is that it's just to show that the river used to be much wider. Much wider, and development throughout the last century and a half has really narrowed the width that the water has to move through. So obviously the same amount of water moving through a narrower river is going to result in flooding, and then of course adding climate change. It's more water than it was 150 years ago. So this is hopefully easy to interpret. This is from a fire insurance map. This is to scale. So the way these maps, they're to scale, they're accurate, but they're very low tech. So it was originally published in 1925, and then as more development occurred, they would periodically update the maps by just gluing an accurate piece of paper on top of it. So you can see actually the old river channel, and there are a bunch of examples throughout the city of this, but when they first published the map in 1925, you can see the blue dotted line kind of going on the bottom middle was the width of the river, and then this is behind death row machines. And then at some point between 1925 and 1948, the building you kind of see to the center right was built, and they put a bunch of fill and narrowed the river at its narrowest point to less than half its width in 1925. That's a pretty dramatic example, but there are many examples of that throughout the city. And you can actually see, so it's a little out of order. The last slide is that building. I don't know if it's the exact same building.
Is this the one you want, Will?
Would you mind going to the last one? Sorry, it's the last order.
Let me know which one, because I can't
Sure,
see
I believe it's number 7. So 2 more, 1 more. This.
Oops, sorry.
Sorry.
There we go, that one?
That's the one. Yeah. So that, you can just see that doesn't look natural. It's right up against the riverbank, and it's actually about, I don't know the exact number, but say 20 feet farther into the river than what the river was prior to that building. So sorry, if you could go to the second slide.
Second
please.
slide, yeah.
So that's just one example of where the river is
This one, right?
drastically narrowed. Yeah, and then so that took place between 1925 and 1948, and it continued after that, but it also started well before this. So in around 1890, give or take, we can see on the right half, we can see the river in its natural state. So much, much wider. I mean, much wider than it is at any point in the city currently. And then you can see some very early development that narrowed it. So you see that old, currently non-existent granite shed. And this is at the end of Granite Street before a bridge existed there. So you can see, like, it used to be a lot of wide river, floodplain next to it. And then you can see piles of granite and then buildings that narrowed it drastically. So that is a big contributor to the flooding we see today.
Maybe just go to the next slide, give you a little more context. That's the full slide. And then the next one here. And these were some drone photos taken of this same area during, like, right after the flood, so you can kind of see the encroachments. And I think one of the things we just wanted to share with you is that, and we talked about this a little last time we were together, is that, you know, over our history, we've slowly kind of squeezed down on the river. And I think lately we're sort of making decisions about backing away from that river, and we're all here faced with decision making. So sometimes the historic context is helpful. And along those lines, I guess we can, let me think, I don't know, should we head to the map? If you, maybe Nicholas, if you could pull up the map.
Yep.
We met with a few more people to discuss potential buyout areas that were taking place where people have come to the city. And then we've also, a few people said, you know, why not look at some of the big parking lots and granite shed areas. Some are fully occupied and active, some are a little less active, and some there's storage all along the river. And again, we haven't approached any landowners, but we just, in the context of this discussion, we thought it's important. These are big areas along the river, particularly along Stevens Branch. And as we were thinking more about these areas, and we shared this map with you all, like even some of the parking lots in these areas occupy the area of between 3 and 10 houses. So we're thinking a lot about a house here, a house there, and are people interested in buyouts? But also we have these big semi-open areas, some more used than others along the river. So there are opportunities, and we kind of put a flood mitigation river lens on a map, and that's kind of what you're looking at here. And really it's just to kind of get us, kind of bring some of these larger parcels along the river into thought. And if people are interested to explore that, then we have to figure out good ways to approach landowners and see if, you know, explore the level of use and what's going on. And sometimes it can be tweaks, like in certain areas, there were former log yards where they, you know, the company said, we're not storing logs anymore. And all of a sudden we have a 14-acre floodplain restoration project down in Brattleboro. That's pretty meaningful for the city. So that was kind of our thought in putting this map together. Again, no one's been contacted, nothing's really happened. It's really a thought exercise about, are there larger parcels or spaces around the rivers and bridges that can catch water, shed debris during flood, and just give us a few relief valves as the rivers come through the city in flood condition. So maybe pause there and see if anyone had a chance to look at the map and have questions or thoughts.
So I've been thinking that lowering the pavement in some, where it was possible, would have an immediate impact, but I also thought it might be cheaper, easier, and faster, depending upon the owner, to happen rather than the buying out of the houses, the demolition of the houses, and then floodplain. Is that accurate or not so much?
I'm sorry, I missed, so lowering the you said
So,
pavement?
so if there are parking areas along the river, if you lowered the pavement there so it became a floodplain,
Yeah.
at least in part, would that be an easier thing to do than the process of buying out houses and demoing the houses and then creating floodplain there?
I think, I would say, and others can chime in, I feel like both have their challenges and their benefits. Certainly, you're not removing a structure. The thing about restoring floodplain is you kind of need to create a safe limit. So on the back edge of that reconnection, if you're kind of cutting into a parking lot or an urban area, maybe there needs to be a wall or some rock slope or something to actually like physically contain that flood. And then really it's about the size, how much area can you get? Like there are parking lots along Stevens Branch where you can imagine half of them go lower, so you would just drive in and go down lower, and then you'd have to sort of create some boundary around that. But the same applies whether it's a house, a big vacant lot, a granite shed. I mean, you have to really think about what happens on the perimeter of those areas for sure.
Thank you.
Alex, do you have anything to add or thoughts on this?
No, I mean, I suppose I'll say as Roy mentioned, it was kind of just like a thought exercise, but we looked at kind of land that is currently open, so like parking lots or just kind of open space as kind of one category. And then we also looked at, are there large buildings adjacent to these areas where it could be an opportunity if you were going to like lower the parking lot to add additional flood storage if you moved out and also acquired an adjacent building, something like that. So there's kind of two layers to what we looked at as far as potential floodplain restoration on these largely industrial properties.
All right, and then I guess the other thing we wanted to speak to you about was we got an initial list of prioritization of projects, which is the homework we had asked you all to do, which looks great. And then the nice thing when we looked at the list, we got it this afternoon, so looked at initially, is that there are 4 projects that seem to separate themselves to the top. The first being the Trestle Bridge, second being Scampini Square buyouts, and then third, the Scampini Square floodplain restoration projects in those buyout areas. And then finally, the Berlin Street Bridge elevation project. And then I was excited to see 5th place, the hydrology and hydraulic study to really get a good model of how water would flow through the area. And honestly, I'm clearly biased. This is what I do for a living, but to model these things and sort of play, can I take every bridge out and keep the city safe? To have those tools is really valuable, and there are many communities who are using those tools to make important decisions like you all are. So we are excited. I think I was started saying, okay, if these 4 or 5 projects are our priorities, what do we do? Well, for Trestle, we need to go talk to the state about this project. It's clearly been a discussion in the past. We've seen some studies with VTrans, and perhaps some of the flooding has maybe changed perspectives, and so that would be a first place. And then I think the second thing would be to really maybe speak with Nicholas and others about the status of the Scampini buyouts and how those are moving forward. And then really to start looking at an area and what could we get for flood storage in that area, should the homeowners who are choosing to relocate in that spot. And then finally looking at the Berlin Street Bridge and what would a design look like that would create some more storage in the area and what's really possible at that project. So I guess in our minds, those were all highly ranked by us as well. We think they're great projects. If I kind of view if we could do 1 or 2 of those, it would be a great benefit for the city. But again, happy to hear discussion since you all did the ranking, some of the ranking, and we can share thoughts a little further.
So I kind of punted on my vote. When you were, and I'm learning a lot, you were in the last time, and what really struck me was the statement that, and Amy, thank you for sending me the link, by the way, but that we don't really even understand our own storm system and how water even moves through our storm system, or even if it does move through our storm system. We don't really understand how water moves through the city. We don't have any modeling. We all hold our breath. We hear 3 to 4 inches of rain and we all freak out. But 3 to 4 inches of rain in a 2-hour period is very different than 3 or 4 inches of rain in a 48-hour period. So I'm learning that. But as I looked at that list, what I didn't see any cost estimates. Some of them ranked like effectiveness, likely to be highly effective, but the vast majority of them had no ranking at all. Didn't tell me if they were moderately effective, highly effective. And so what I realize is that I really don't, I think until we have an understanding of how water moves through the city, how it moves through the city in a 2-inch, 2-hour storm versus a 2-inch, 24-hour storm, until we understand those things, and until we understand cost and until we understand effectiveness, we're kind of flying blind. I mean, it's almost an emotional list where, you know, we looked at the areas that were hardest hit and we point at the trestle a lot and say, and I'm not saying the trestle isn't a high contributor or isn't, but I don't really have the data to tell me that. So it would seem to me that the first place we really need to start is a good hydrology and modeling study, and then also understand how our own storm systems are working. Where, as I said, if they're working at all. You know, we talked about the large one that moves underneath the city. We have no idea what the condition of it is, none, through the entire city. So once we do that, I mean, that's a big list that will likely never complete in my lifetime. I think what could be, and then we've got this list of projects that are on the table. And we have a list of projects that aren't on the table that you just talked to us about. So what I'd really be interested in knowing is if we had, pick a number, $30 million to spend, how would you spend it? Even if there's a project that isn't on the list, you know, for example, I think of the area past the Granite Museum between Barre and Berlin. You know, that's a huge undeveloped area. And so would that be effective in terms of storing water, not only water that has already moved through Barre and prevent the water from backing up, but also preventing us from affecting our neighbors in Berlin and Montpelier? So should we be asking you folks as the experts and the scientists to tell us what we should be doing, including projects that aren't on the list? If you see a large parcel, Merchants Row, and you say, gee, you know, the river used to be there, and if you lowered Merchants Row, land that the city, and that's a hypothetical, by the way, I don't think it would be effective, but to hear that, you know, when you look at the city of Barre, forget who owns what is where, tell us as scientists what would be most effective. And was my takeaway on it. Yes.
I'm going to more or less echo the mayor. You know, it's great that we had this opportunity to go through and say what we wanted, but really I'm hoping you guys will say, here's what would have a big impact. For me, like saving as much of the residential neighborhoods as possible in the north end would be my highest priority. So if there's something we could do along the Stevens branch then that would save those folks the water from crossing 302. That would be great. And then I thought separately about the potash and Gunner's Brook, like the potash culverts just seemed like a great project. However, really, I don't want to be the one. I want you guys to say, impact would save these neighborhoods, would make it better and safer. That's what I would like to hear.
So that was, oh, sorry, we'll just go right in order. Councilor Guston.
Thank you. I'm going to sort of both and the comments that have been made in that it's my two things. First of all, would love to get a sense of how many applications we think we can feasibly put in, because we talked before, would love to apply for the whole 90 million for Barre City. But I think that one of the factors that would help us consider what to greenlight, because as I understand it, one of the criteria for forwarding a grant is going to be that effectiveness ratio, you know, the risk reward ratio. So there may be things that we really want to have done, but are not as likely to pass through the grant process. So I would love to know that information in order to say, like, yeah, I'd love to have this done, but this project is a shoo-in because of those factors would, I think, get my vote over even something I'd really like to be done.
Councilor Spaulding. Councilor Wassezak. Flip a coin.
So I had a lot of trouble prioritizing for many of the same reasons, and I think that I'm sure the city manager got my list and was like, was not the assignment, Sonia. But I like to make up my own rules, so I did, and I grouped them together because I felt like, what's the point of removing the trestle if you're not gonna put floodplain restoration in, was it Fratini Place or whatever? So I sort of lumped them together because I think that they should be more of a package deal for some of these things. I don't think really they can stand alone. That's my opinion. My other question is, are there any things on the list that we as a city can do ourselves that are more affordable, let's say, not such big ticket items? I'm thinking about like the culverts as I was looking through the list. Are those things that we can sort of chip away at and put into our budgets as we go through the next few budget seasons and say to our taxpayers, look, this is what we're going to spend our money on, and this is how we're going to do our own work on this list, and not necessarily have to go out and get grants for it. So those were some of my questions about prioritizing.
That's Wes there.
So I just want to be, we don't have, yes, we need, to have all the data that we can get our hands on, and doing the hydrology study is important. But, we can't not do anything for the foreseeable future. Like, the city won't survive. So my question, Mr. is like, are you suggesting that like we hit pause on doing the top 4, the trestle, the Berlin Street Bridge, and the Scampini stuff, like pause that until, I'm just like understanding what
No,
the next
because
step is.
there are some that are going to be helpful. There are some projects, some of the buyouts on Scampini Square, they're sort of self-evident. It, with all due respect, it doesn't take a water scientist to figure that out. So no, I am not at all suggesting, I wish we had moved faster and done more. So I'm not at all suggesting that we shouldn't do anything in the meantime. But I guess I'd love to have you react to my comment that, when you don't understand exactly how something works and you don't have a model that provides you with variables, what does a 2-inch storm in 48 hours, what does it look like? Well, if we don't know the capacity if we don't really know the capacity, we don't even know where all of our storm system is. So how can you possibly come up with a meaningful, effective list if you don't know that,
Yeah. Great points from everyone. I guess, so this assignment, I guess the goal here was to participate, have a little bit of an iterative approach. Everything you all said is exactly right. Like, we are responsible to understand what has the benefit cost ratio that's going to do well, and what are the most best flood mitigation projects. The way this process is working is that we're not going to be able to go through like a full design process before the HMGP pre-application is due. So some places we have some models. They're not the best models, but we can kind of use them to maybe take a bridge out or widen a bridge. Other things we'll use our experience in other communities and projects around the state to say, like, this is really important. Like, the trestle is a very obvious benefit, right? We've seen it, so many flood photos of it clogged with debris. It's in a very big flood prone area. I mean, a lot of the bridge work, in my view, is low hanging fruit. But the modeling will answer the questions in more detail. So we kind of have to keep both things moving. We have to sort of keep refining this list. We'll have a flood mitigation lens on it to be like, this is all working. We did a little bit of prioritization. We need to fill this out a little more. And now we kind of have some rankings from you, and we'll be sure to say, like, no, this project really isn't going to fly, or it is. And so again, I think it's a little bit of an iterative process. And so the next step of this will be, once we land on the top projects on this list, we're going to have to dig a little deeper in design, feasibility, like, are the landowners willing? And then what do the design volumes look like? What could the cost of this thing be? If we have a model, we'll plug the alternative in and see what those benefits are, understand the damages that have taken places around them, and weigh those two and be like, this thing's going to really go. So that's kind of our task. Maybe we came at you for prioritization a little too early, but it was really also just to kind of get a feel for you all who experienced the flooding and seen all these problem areas. And we've talked with DPW and some residents, Danielle and Amy and others. We've kind of talked with some of the people who have kind of know the area and the flooding pattern. So again, we're going to keep building information and then try to converge on some good projects with you all. That was kind of the point of the exercise.
Yes, sir. Watch your head.
I don't have it on camera here, but these guys have got a good thing going. And I guarantee if you asked every granite company down this area, they would help with this, because they have to clean out all the machinery, all kinds of grout in Graniteville. You come down by train, the idea beyond the city where you talked about, that open land beyond the museum, we could build that a lot wider. We could do heavy duty grout, pile them, just like you got by the Arcade Miles Bridge. And we could widen it, and that would give us a big area to take all the water away from the city. It would move it quick, and it would push it away from Barre City and save a lot of houses, a lot of stone sheds. I've watched a neighbor up the street on South Vine. We had a boat crossways from our house. He was gonna come down and pick it up. He never had a chance because his loaders were working, cleaning up the granite sheds to get back in business. I stop there all the time, have cigarettes. I can't even think of the guy's name. But it's a big, I think it's called Granite City. It's right across from where they work on trucks anyways. But that guy would be more than helpful to get trucks, haul that big blocks of granite down and lay them right in place. We have the equipment to do it. In the city of Barre, a loader will do it, an excavator will do it, and stack blocks, but build it as wide as we can right down there. That's gonna continue getting rid of the water from our area. That's just one of my suggestions, maybe low cost to the city. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Watch your head. Again, Councilor Stockwell.
I think Councilor Deering, did you have a?
Yep, Councilor Deering.
I was just wondering if you could speak to some of the curveball we kind of have here in Barre with all the granite in the rivers, with the barriers in the river, essentially making those walls and not allowing nature to kind of do what nature does. Can you just speak to the history of that maybe, or even how some of that really affects what we're dealing with here in the city?
Yeah. That's a piece of like the flood legacy of many, many towns and cities, is that we've had granite or other sorts of fill. We kind of fill in with walls, like you see it through Montpelier, you see it here, but these rivers are trying to kind of squeeze down. So there's just no place for the water to go, like the volume of water, until it gets outside of that essential rock line trough, and then it's where we are. So a lot of this thinking in the map that Alex made is like, are there areas where we can, and even doing the parking lot ideas, just push those areas down. So if you had, Main Street or 302, and you could have a second level where the water and debris would, even if it caught debris and ice and thaw floods, that you can get out easier than if it's going to the bridge or not. So the legacy of just filling in the rivers, and again, because this is things we've been working on our whole life as water resource scientists, and now we're seeing this flooding, like we're thinking more about like, how do we get here, then how do we kind of undo this? And it's been a long process of this filling. And that was why Will and I, we were looking at these photos and saying, and reading flood accounts from 27, like, wow, there was more space along the river then. And then, through industrialization, we kind of filled in, and some sheds left, some came. Right. And some bridges were added, some dams are gone now that were here, and some are still here. So there's like a whole mix of things along the river, and now we're in a stage where we're seeing sort of unprecedented amounts of rain in short periods of time. And we're seeing this all over the region where like people are starting to pull back, just because we need to get the flood waves through where most of the people are living.
Do you know if there's any way to tell the stability of these banks after these storms? I mean, I've kind of gone through some of them a little bit, just walking around, and some of them have definitely kind of come down some, and I'm a little curious about how stable they really are, and who might even take care of that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Bank evaluation is pretty common after floods to make sure that if you have walls or something, they're intact. So I think it's something like DPW could do like initially, and then if there's concern, finding a structural engineer to sort of like evaluate the walls and make sure they're intact, or a geotechnical engineer to do some evaluation like through these walled-in sections of river.
Okay.
One thing that I will admit I have the least experience of anyone at this table with floods, but one thing that's really stood out with Barry's experience is there is, I mean, just the topography, the narrow streams, there is going to be flooding. It's just a huge problem, but there are a lot of it is debris based, or like specific points where the water backs up behind a narrow culvert, a narrow bridge, a place where debris gets caught. And so addressing these specific points, those might be the points that have kind of outsized impact compared to just restoring, say, any old parking lot, like a parking lot that would allow debris to be caught that would allow debris to be caught in a place where it doesn't result in backup that floods the surrounding area, as opposed to at say the Berlin Street Bridge, just a big place where we know debris catches. Like that could be, those would maybe be places where you'd have higher benefits for the same cost as restoring a parking lot, you know, half-mile upstream that would contribute incrementally but not drastically reduce the flooding. So there's basically, because of the topography and the amount of water that's coming through, it's not a problem that can be totally solved, but it's a problem that maybe those can be big steps.
I think it's important to consider both approaches. I think you're talking about both removing or modifying structures and other constructions that kind of trap debris, but also providing additional area for floodwater and sediment debris to settle out. So it's kind of like using both is kind of the most resilient type of strategy in this situation.
Councilor Stockwell?
Would the hydrology study do all the little streams and brooks? I have to say, I started a job years ago in a building, and I went to look at the basement, and they said, no, you can't go there because the river runs through it. And sure enough, you open the door and the river runs through it. I don't think that's anyone's named river. It just is a river that goes under the city. So would the hydrology study be that comprehensive?
So we've actually talked about a couple studies tonight. A hydrology study is the generation of water from a rainfall event and how it runs into channels. And then there's a pipe evaluation study that the mayor discussed. So what's happening in our stormwater pipes? And then finally, there's a hydraulic study, which is when water is in the river, how is it moving through, like the depth and velocity. So it's kind of a combination. In urban areas, you kind of need the combination. How much water comes into certain areas? How does that water behave once it's in channels, and how does that water behave once it's in pipes? And clearly, you've all talked about, well, Stevens branches up, the water and sediment go into the pipe, and now the pipes are pushing water at us. So the interaction of the channels and pipes is really, it's very complicated in an urban area, especially old areas that have been built up sequentially over time, where there's not great mapping, and you are not alone. There's a lot of this going on around Vermont, even our small state right now, in village centers, in cities and towns. So yeah, it's sort of a combination of finding that. So like the unnamed small stream, sometimes they rise up to the size if they're in a drainage valley and there's a building in the way and we know the river comes through. Sometimes that might make it into a model. Other times we just say, well, we're thinking about what happens downstream and we know that water's collecting and somehow getting into this channel or this pipe. So you have to account for all that, either in one of the models. So I didn't mean to give you a long-winded answer.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
So the studies that we've been speaking about, how long would that take?
I would say like typically there's a few steps in it. You collect your data, like where are the pipes, how big are they, what is the survey of the channels, and then what's the land use and how does the water move through the watersheds coming to those channels. That takes a few months. You do it outside of winter, likely when the leaves are off the trees, so you can see really well. Then you have about, I don't know, a few months of modeling, maybe, maybe it's a year process to do one of those models and get information. And then you're sort of testing alternatives and actually like building and really understanding what's on this list.
And rough cost,
Um,
something like the city of Barre?
To do the city.
Nothing I'm gonna hold you to. don't-
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say like,
It's where the engineers get worried.
40 to
Well, look, I'm not
60,000.
gonna be coming back at you in 6 months saying you said.
yeah, $40,000 to $60,000 to probably do like a full model of the whole city and all the flow. With like the survey, data collection, I'm just spitballing.
40 to 60,000? And that would include the storm system, or that would be?
Yeah, I think that would include the
So
storm.
could we get that
storm
on the
model.
agenda for next
Sounds
week?
like a bargain.
Taking it out of ARPA funds, getting going on that? No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Sooner we get going on that, sooner, and, you know, to your earlier comment, I don't think anyone is suggesting that, you know, we do nothing in the meanwhile.
Yeah, of course.
But this is where we really have to depend on your expertise. If, you know, if you look at our list and say, look, you're just wrong, you know, this project right here is likely less cost, less resistance, and more effective, then obviously, you know, we need to hear that, because we're not sitting on that
Yeah,
side of the
yeah,
table.
and we'll certainly say that, and that's certainly our
Yeah.
job.
And it's, you know, daunting. These are not inexpensive, you know, inexpensive projects.
Yeah,
We're fortunate to have $90 million up for grabs in Vermont Emergency Management Grant, but, you know, if you think about what's happened in Plainfield and Lyndonville and St. Johnsbury, you know, those were communities that are eligible for those funds that likely weren't going to apply in, you know, 6 months ago, and now they are. So that competition has only gotten more. I mean, as a city, we're going to be putting a lot of money into mitigation projects for the foreseeable future, because I think about, and having grown up here, you know, I know areas where we used to play along the river or even fish along the river that have really changed, you know, just in my lifetime. You know, from the time I was, 50 years, from the time I was 13 till today. And as you were showing us the history, it dawned on me that, you know, those projects happened, you know, as the city grew and as the city became more prosperous and more industry established here, and we ran out of, you know, people ran out of places to build. They said, hey, we'll make some. It's just this stupid river, and I'll just take a little piece. And so they did. So they projected into the river, and that happened 1 or 2 projects a year for 75 years. And here we are. So you think about it, it's somewhat discouraging, because I think, okay, so if we do 1 or 2 projects a year to take it back, well, 75 years. Wow. So that goes back to my point where if you see something that, in your opinion, would be really effective, doesn't matter whose property it is, I think the council would like to know about it so that we could react to it, and maybe we'd say, well, instead of pursuing these 10 projects that won't even be as effective as this one, maybe we should be talking to those folks. Councilor Spalding?
I agree with what you're saying about us encroaching on the river, but I also would caution everyone to recognize that it's not just one thing, it's a multitude of things that are happening. And it includes, you know, new developments that are upstream from us. It includes more rain, larger rain events. And so I think we can say, okay, we need to fix these culverts, but that doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to put in a culvert that's going to handle that 100-year flood. We have to be realistic in what we can afford and what's doable, is my assumption. And so how do we do what makes sense for us and also restore those places where the river really used to be, so that we can, I guess, live in communion with the river instead of like aggressively angry at the river all the time, so.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Just to your point about use of the river, I have a painting in my office that hangs above my desk that is the north end around the Thwing Mill area. It's entirely a meadow. I should send a picture of it out to folks. It's really quite beautiful. And I hung it there for, sort of for inspiration. But what I would like to hear is sort of what our next steps are, what our dates and deadlines are, what you need us to, when you need us to respond to your feedback about this list, and what our deadlines are.
Is that?
I was gonna say, I can speak to that some. So by the end of this month, basically, we need to have, a refined list down so that, you know, we can do those BCAs, have that, and be able to get that information, because currently the date to have the pre-applications in for us, or for the city of Barre, is the end of September. So we have a little more grace time than in the other communities, but it's so we can get that initial engineering, so we can get those applications in. So, you know, next steps, I mean, obviously, you know, the 308 trestle, you know, has obviously been a problem in the city, so I mean, that's probably a project I would assume we still want to progress with. You know, to be honest, even when we were out doing the site visits, it looked like the trestle had actually even shifted a little bit in this last flood. You know, which I was like, well, maybe it'll go away on its own. One more. You know, obviously we don't need another flood. But, you know, outside of that, you know, I mean, obviously the buyouts, if the city's pursuing a buyout on a location, and exactly, yeah, a lot of them you can just look at a map and go, oh yeah, that touches right against the river, that obviously is gonna have a decent mitigation action there of restoring some floodplain. So, you know, there are some easier ones there to review, you know, like the Berlin Street Bridge, that's a much tougher one because you have the railroad there as well, so it's not an easy you can just lift the bridge, you know, because, you know, with that railroad piece, you still have to, you know, be able to allow the trains to go through and everything, so you can't just raise everything nice and easily.
And there's no approach.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could
Exactly.
I mean, you literally can't raise it 6 feet on one end
Exactly.
without changing the grade of the road to 6 feet to accommodate it, which is going to require rebuilding 2 miles of road.
Exactly. It's a very constrained location, so I mean, you know.
But Councilor Spalding mentioned, just take it away.
Yeah, or maybe put in a slightly smaller structure and go with a little weight limited, you know, so cars can cross, but no large trucks or something. Other ways you could possibly have a bridge there, but, you know, a smaller size structure. But yeah, I mean, it's just us trying to get this list refined down so we can, you know, ideally to give Roy and his team as much time to work on those BCAs to be able to get us to that September deadline.
So I think our thought is we'll come back and do a little more prioritization after seeing your thoughts, and maybe come back with a little more information on the mitigation side. Start to think maybe the top bunch of projects, we'll start to think about quantification, like what could something like that cost? There was a question a while ago about how many do we, again, pre-apply for, just to open the door for a full application if the state were to accept those. And I've actually asked the state this, I haven't got quite a perfectly straight answer, but you know, they're talking like millions of dollars to each community at least. So we can sort of set the stage for, you know, how much would it cost to take out the trestle, or to, you know, elevate and redo Berlin Street, and kind of ballpark that and sort of give you like, you know, a list of costs and some of the anticipated benefits, and sort of help prioritize that. So that's kind of maybe on us as a next step, and then we could share the list back in the order with a little more information now that we've kind of seen some of your thoughts, and go from there. And then I think hearing some of the information, we'll maybe think about really important locations that maybe couple with some of these projects, like there is a garage right next to Berlin Street that actually is could be an important debris spot. So, you know, we can sort of think about maybe this map and this list a little broader, like where are the most important spots, and come back with some other ideas as well.
That would be great. Mr. Burns, do you have a question?
My name is George Burns. I'm the owner of Apple Candy, right on the river on the other side. I've been there for over 50 years, so I've experienced many water issues, and I don't want to reiterate and talk about the problem, but I have to say I'm a lot more encouraged than I was before I got here. It does seem like it's, maybe for the first time in a long time, there's actually some thoughts and processes about trying to do something. And I would really encourage this council to understand that you really have an opportunity to leave a legacy that hasn't been done previously up to this point. We could talk about the devastation, because everybody knows all that stuff, but I think that the challenge for me has been that it hasn't appeared like very much has happened up to this point. And I think that's the part that's really frustrating and difficult. And again, I don't know what anybody thinks about legacies, but this council is in a really unique, and the mayor and the city manager are really in a unique position where they really can do something that really makes a difference. And I hope that you get past the words of that are used all the time, like complicated and difficult. I hope that you stop using those words, because those are the words that have been used forever as far as this process is concerned. So I hope that, your job really is to solve problems. Some are easier and some are more difficult. But there's an opportunity now, and I hope that it doesn't get bogged down in studies and red tape and on and on and on, and just more and more conversations about how complicated and difficult things are, and nothing actually happens. So, again, I want to say I'm a lot more encouraged than I was before I got here. So thanks.
Thank you, George. Councilor Spaulding.
One more question about the number one, the project that rose to the top, which is the trestle bridge. When we say we want to remove it, but my question is, how do we apply for a grant and say we want to remove something that doesn't belong to us and that we have no jurisdiction over? Like, really, should that really be our top project when we really don't have a lot of control over it? I guess, yes, we all agree it needs to be gone, but what I'm wondering is, how much money and time are we going to spend on something that we have absolutely no control over? And how can we better spend our time trying to get rid of it? That's my question.
I and the manager have conversations about that multiple times every week. We will likely, at some point in the future, be meeting with the folks, with the stakeholders, with VTrans, with the railroad, with manufacturers. That's a very good question. And I'll be perfectly candid, we're dealing with the railroad. The railroad didn't get any permits when they rebuilt the tracks after the 23 flood and raised those tracks 12 inches. I can't do that as a property owner. Nicholas can't do that as a municipal manager, and yet the railroad can. The railroad simply has incredible powers that have been written into federal statutes. So my preference would be I understand that the railroad would like to keep a railroad crossing of the Stevens branch in Barre. I get that. I understand that. I'm hopeful that we can get something better. We talk about making the Berlin Street Bridge better, making the Willie Street Bridge better, making other areas better. So I can't sit here and promise you that the city of Barre is in a position to negotiate or demand the removal of the trestle. But I think that if we're a good partner, I don't think it's unreasonable, and I don't think any reasonable person could look at what's there and say that's acceptable. It's not. So could we come up with something that's better? We understand what you want, but we look at the damage in our city and react to that and build something better. Build something that does, I mean, that's all we're asking for. It's that, we just don't want something that traps debris.
Right, but my question to.
I don't think we can answer your
Right,
question.
so what
Demand
I'm
it?
saying is we're
Good
focusing on,
luck.
number one is the trestle for, it's risen to the top in every single thing that you've presented, but how do we present that as a grant opportunity to say, yeah, they need this trestle removed. We really don't need any money for it. The railroad controls it. The railroad company controls it. So
Yeah, so I mean, our thought was to go to the state emergency management and V-Trans and have this discussion to say, we're working on this project with you all from a flood mitigation and council point of view, this is rising to the top of our list. Like, we want to discuss this. And so that's kind of why I think the top few projects we need to do a little more homework on, like look at plans and then try to make sure they're viable projects. So that feels like it's on us to sort of meet with those folks. Maybe we'll be in touch if you all are meeting with them.
Yep, I'm sure we can make that happen.
thank you.
I just wanted to point out that the city of Montpelier successfully did have the railroad moved and also created a walking trail along the river. So it's not impossible. It's been done. That's something we should consider.
Right, they didn't demand it. They negotiated it.
Yeah, we could do that.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we intend to do. Yes, sir.
Make sure I do my name this time. I'm Gary C. Hall Senior. I did 23 years in the military, and I also worked with engineers, okay? I helped build the road when Irene went down through all the way to Rutland. I started in Woodstock. I was standing there flagging cars, stopping them, because people wanted to go. Roads are this wide. You know how they rebuilt them? We took it out of the river. We moved it back up. We did construction. We cleaned that river, and when it's done, it was all fresh water again. What this state needs to do, and I'm willing to fight the state of Vermont myself if I have to run for governor, and get this stuff dredged out all the way to Winooski, and then that'll cut out most of our problem. Because you look at Berwyn Street Bridge, just for an example, if you look at the wall behind Arcade Miles, it's collapsing. Where they've already filled that bridge on that side, because the guy from Johnston, Vermont came down with a special drop, and he loosened those tires up and broke that stuff loose, and it went fast like that. I was right there watching what happened. I helped him direct traffic with his dump trucks so they could haul that wood out of here. But the tires went fast and they were gone for miles, just like that in 5 minutes. I'm willing to go to the state of Vermont and fight the governor. If I have to run for governor, I'm dead serious, I will do it. Because I've talked to so many people in Barre in the last month, and businesses and everything. We have a pizza shop that's closed. It's one of the best pizza shops I've had right in downtown. We're having people ready to move out of this town because they're sick of it. And I've watched houses for the 4th time, my house has been here, down on Main Street. It's a shambles. It's not safe to go in the basement. It's that bad. It's a 2-story structure. I owe taxes on it, but it's on hold right now. I'm gonna fight the state of Vermont to buy 3 houses right there, if they haven't already bought the lower one behind me. And then give them to me and move them to build something different for the veterans. Another veterans place, because we have too many homeless veterans in the state of Vermont. And I'll find a piece of land that's high and dry to do that, okay? That'll be my responsibility. Mr. Burns, I used to work for him years ago, Cabell Candy. When the heritage thing happened down here in town, I walked down the back street to go to my house. A car crowded over because there was a truck coming, he put me right in a sinkhole. Right against the guardrail, nailed my kneecap right into the guardrail. I thought I was gonna have to dive in the river. I'm serious, that's how close it was. It was dangerous to me. I've limped. I've gone down Main Street with a wheelchair. Go down by Depot Square in a wheelchair and see if you can cross the road. It's like this. I almost went over backwards. A guy pushed me across. Our Main Street is sinking. I've worked underneath this back when it had gas leaks. And a house floated over by, I can't even think of the name of the place, but the school, the playground over at the end. Woman blew up because she lit a cigarette or turned on a light switch. And we found a gas leak right in front of City Hall. We traced it all the way up through.
You're getting a little off topic on me, sir.
But anyways, we need need to force the state of Vermont to let us dredge these rivers. We've gained 4 to 5 feet in the last year of sand right by Berlin Street Bridge and around that corner. There's a big island right there now. Used to be a little one on the left, a little one on the right. Now it's taking up most of that space. And it's just getting worse as you go down further. And I know there's a pipeline that goes underneath the end of Vine Street and back up to go to the sewer plant, because every time it backs up, we smell sewer. And they come down and they pump it for us, and that stops the sewer, but it's coming all the way up Berlin Street down there. And I know we gotta work around that, but once you pass that, you got clear sailing down there, that's why I said make it wider. That's gonna help us a lot. What was done on Maple Avenue, all it turned out to be is a catch-all for brush, and put the water right down the main drag. It helped, don't get me wrong. It slowed it up for a temporary minute to give the guys something to do down below.
Okay, we're getting a little off. Are you running for governor already?
I'm serious.
Because that sounded like a stump speech to me. I'm picking on you. No, listen, with regard to, we hear a lot about dredging. I've spoken about riverbed maintenance. That's not the only answer. Riverbed maintenance is important in certain places, and I'm sure these folks will agree, but not sort of wholesale excavation of the riverbed. It just doesn't work for the city. It doesn't work for our neighbors. So I promise you that in the hydrology study that the council, I hope, will approve at our next meeting, these smart people will address riverbed maintenance or dredging, as some folks like to call it. I promise, okay?
One other thing, we need
Yes.
to address crosswalks, because they're very dangerous when they go up and down by Depot Square. I'm dead serious.
Yeah, I see them scheduled for repaving in 2027, and I have already spoken with the Secretary of Transportation to let him know that it simply can't wait that long, that there are certain sections that I believe, and again, I'm not an engineer, but just looking at other areas of the Main Street reconstruction project, there are certain areas that I think may have failed prematurely, the mix. So there's a lot that happens between Tuesdays and Tuesdays, and I promise you, we're working on it. Don't hit your head when you sit down again. Okay. Holy cow, where were we? Amy, did you have a question or comment?
I was just gonna say, to Counselor Spalding's question about the trestle and kind of how to lobby for that. One of the things that was stunning at that public meeting they did, and I put the link to the slides in the chat, is they did do budget workups on that, and it was $400,000 to remove it and $2 million to replace it. And again, everyone in the room was stunned. There was no one representing the local business or anything from the railroad there. It was all just local citizens, and we were all just stunned. Like, why would the state spend 1.6 million more for something that none of us want when we're dealing with flooding? So to me, you know, proposing for state money, we say, like, please give us the $400,000 option instead of the $2 million option that does not help us with flooding, and where's the support for it? So yeah, it's asking for state money to take down something the state has, but it just, I mean, it just didn't make sense in the math. So they did do the cost estimates for that already. You know, that's 1.6 million we could spend on a different flood project.
Yeah,
or housing.
I appreciate that. If you gave me, if you Google Bridge 308, there's actually a tremendous amount of information available on that, on the Bridge 308, which we also call the trestle. There were actually 6 alternatives presented at one point, and I think the price tag was a lot bigger. Mr. Anthony, you would know it was a lot bigger than 1.6 million. I think it was over double that. Yeah, 4 million? Yeah.
Yeah, I meant it was 1.6 million more.
It was a big number. So, yeah, I mean, there's certain parts of that just, you know, again, as we talk about resources and where to spend them and what is most effective, what makes the most sense, some of those options related to Bridge 308 just don't seem to sort of pass that test. So we'll keep working on it, I promise, and these folks will address it, I promise. Anything else? So we have our next steps in terms of the, who gets the proposal together for the hydrology study and the hydrology and modeling study? Is that something that we will?
Well, I guess you put me on the spot. I just want to go ahead.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so like,
I'm famous for that.
I could, like, just prepare a budget, like, sort of off to the side from this project, just to give you like, we could put our heads into it a little more now that we've learned more about the inner workings of where streams are and pipes and all. For like the three, like the hydrology, hydraulics, and the pipes. And share that with you all.
Yep.
'Cause, yeah, I think it's gonna be a little more complicated with the three different pieces, but, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, early in your presentation, you said you were thrilled to see that hydrology study actually kind of filtered towards the top.
Yeah, the
And I took that to mean, I'm glad these people are finally listening. Well, I think we are. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a tremendous amount of pushback from the council if we look at spending, I'll even give you a little wiggle room, $40,000 to $80,000 on a study that will help us better understand how water moves through the city, how effective our stormwater system is, and how we best mitigate the effects of flooding. We need to know what's going to work and, what's not. I guarantee you there will likely be a few eye-openers in that study where we look at it and said, geez, none of us ever thought of that one, including yourselves. So we're anxious. I think we're committed and we're anxious to get going. So thank you. Is there anything else you need from us? Yes.
One last question.
Sure.
So just so I understand our timeline and our next steps, I know I'd asked this earlier, I just want to clarify it to make sure we're all on the same page. What you're asking for is a list of projects that you'll move forward with pre-engineering on by our next scheduled council meeting is August 27. So are we thinking that we will look at that list and move that list forward on August 27? Does that seem feasible all around?
Yeah, but you're going to give us a little feedback, right?
We're gonna put some work in it and, yeah.
Yeah.
So before that meeting, we'll have kind of our lens on the priorities and some other thoughts. Hopefully we'll connect on the trestle and try to do a little feasibility work on the top bunch of projects.
If you email me, I can help you with that. I can get you connected with the right people.
Sounds great.
Yes.
Speaking of the trestle, have you folks worked on a project like that where you've advocated for that kind of removal or?
Yeah, on rail lines, like we worked along, this is a little off to the side, but in Lamoille County, we worked on a big floodplain restoration project that was on the old St. J and Lamoille County Railroad. And the conclusion was that the area was to be federally rail banked, so the railroad could always come back and get it. And that, I actually, as we had this discussion, I'm thinking maybe this works here, that the area stays a rail crossing, the bridge goes away, and then when they put the bridge back, they kind of have to demonstrate that there's no change to the flood levels. So maybe this project, if all goes great, could accomplish the first step of that and relieve the bottleneck. And then the next if there is a project that the rail would have the option to go back to. And again, I'm speaking without having talked to anyone about it.
You're describing exactly the conversation that we've had with the railroad to date. That, I mean, we all know that you don't snap your fingers and a railroad bridge appears. It's probably a 3 to 4 year process from the time they say to an engineer, we want this type of trestle that will mitigate the effects of flooding, whether it's different shaped piers. So we've been having that conversation and if the city simply keeps an open mind, well, what we get in return is we get the trestle gone tomorrow. So, if this weekend does come to pass, then that trestle, if the trestle had been removed, that trestle isn't going to be there. And then they'll have more time to study it and do exactly as you were discussing. But in the meanwhile, what is an obvious flood hazard that no one wants? I don't think the railroad is necessarily, thrilled with that, with Bridge 308 as it currently exists. That goes away sooner rather than later, and a clear hazard, flood hazard, goes away almost immediately. So that's kind of the discussion we've been having.
We at the region have had actually the exact same discussion with V-Trains on this, try to utilize this funding, while it's currently here, get the trestle out. When they, acquire that funding, if they want a new bridge down the road, they can then put that in, but
right.
obviously.
And we
First step is
can't,
Let's get this out.
you know, we can't sit here and promise that we're gonna embrace any design they present, but I can't sit here and say we won't either. I mean, it's all a hypothetical until you see if there is a replacement bridge, if you see the replacement bridge design, and then we give it to you folks and say, all right, tell us what's gonna happen with this bridge. We did the modeling.
Yeah.
So now extend the modeling to this bridge and tell me what it looks like. And if you could say, well, it's not perfect, but it's 95% better than what was there, well, we got rid of a hazard. So, thank you. I learn a lot every time you come in. Probably not enough, but I'm trying really hard. And if you do Google Bridge 308, there is a lot of information on that bridge. It is infamous. Vermont, make sure you put Vermont in there. You won't. Mr. Burns?
The next council meeting is going to be discussion about this.
I suspect you will see, I can't promise you it, there will be at the next council meeting, because I asked the manager to to connect with these folks and get some sort of budget proposal so that we can approve the studies and get going on those at the next meeting. The city is actively applying for Vermont Emergency Management Funds. These folks are helping us narrow the list of flood mitigation projects. And there's $90 million available in Vermont Emergency Management Funds, and we're going to be actively applying, and I'm just off the cuff a little bit here, roughly 6 to 10 projects that we're going to, not including specific buyouts, but 6 to 10 projects that are included on the list that these folks have. So you'll see that. What I encourage you to do is just watch the agenda, and you'll see it. But please do.
Very interested and very hopeful that we'll get past difficult and complicated and we'll actually start to do something.
We're past difficult and complicated. We're at determined, Mr. Burns, I promise you.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilor Stockwell.
Why use ARPA funding if it's possible to do a grant funded for the hydrology study?
I want to get going. You know, I mean, a grant is going to be, even if we did Vermont Emergency Management, they'd probably fund it. It's a pretty smart way to go. But I mean, I, for one, am just really anxious to understand specifically a lot more about our storm system and what's happening with that, as well as all of these things that they talk about. And I think the sooner we have that information, the better. You know, you heard them talk about a complete study could be as much as 12 months off. I mean, we'll get some information as we go along. We'll get good, valuable information. But a complete study is 12 months. And I just don't want to make that 12, 14, or that's all. I'm not saying it's the wrong idea, but I don't, other than Vermont Emergency Management, I'm not aware of a specific grant that could be available for this. And
Not immediate.
I wish I was a member of the council a year ago. I wish these folks had been here a year ago and we had said, yes, we'd have that study now. Yes.
Very, very quickly, if we were to approve that funding out of ARPA in the interest of moving things quickly, does your firm have the capacity to start something this fall? You mentioned you'd like, I know. This is partly why I'm asking, right? Because if we're going to move as quickly as possible, or do you know of someone else who has the capacity? Because you mentioned you'd like to do it when the leaves are down, coming into winter.
I guess I have to sort of do a little more planning ahead and come here looking for work. So
Okay.
Just came, so something we could look at.
That may help us determine the funding if there's no one who can do it until the funding comes through.
That's why I asked them to connect with the manager and see what they can do. But I think the sooner we get started, the better. I can take you on a great walk through the Potash Brook as it comes from the city into the town.
Sounds great.
Show you Tiger Falls, show you all the great sights. Awesome. Anything else, folks? Thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, council, we are at item 8B on the agenda. This is the buyouts update. And sir, if you want to take a closer seat, that's fine, because I know you're interested in this part of the meeting. Mr. Manager, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mayor. So council, you had a PowerPoint in your packet, a follow-up from the meeting on the 23rd where Councilor Spalding had asked for a update of where we were, what the landscape was on the buyouts. So this first batch, this is mostly pictures in this presentation. These are buyouts, showing areas where buyouts are underway. So this first slide here is a visual of the north end, and the green property there is a FEMA buyout that has been submitted to VEM. This is, we think, has great mitigation value to the city, as being right along the river, and I think meets a lot of the, a lot of the things that the river folks just talked to us about, of being adjacent to the river, giving the river some room to move. So that is, we think, a valuable mitigation site. The yellow boxes here are sort of in an in-between phase. We've talked about broadly needing to do both mitigation and redevelopment on the north end. So these are properties that have potential non-FEMA buyout options down the road, right? So we've talked a lot about the cluster on 2nd Street. Those folks have been offered purchase options. There's another cluster on 3rd Street that have also been approached. And then there's areas here that could be both floodplain restoration along North Main or also redevelopment potential. But this gives you a visual of where that core north end impacted area and where it is and where the buyouts currently sit. The inset there from Scampini Square, Vine Street. So this is a closer look at it. The green blocks are all buyouts that are also underway. The two red ones are not currently in an application. They haven't been offered an application because they are not clustered along the river. So just to step back a little bit, when we started moving through the buyout process a little bit more in depth in February, we had gotten advice on the city staff level to focus on clusters along the river. And so that's what we did. And as we've gone through that process, some of these clusters have grown. So for example, in this particular slide, if you go back to the February 27th presentation, you'll see that the green block there in Scampini and Vine Street was smaller. And that's because two of the properties on Scampini decided to apply for buyout. So that, because it expanded the cluster we were looking at, we extended an application to that property owner. The red area, I'm sure everyone saw the story about this family on BT Digger. The unfortunate piece is that there appears to be less mitigation value there to the city because it's unfortunately not clustered. There's a property between them and the river. There's a property between them and the rest of the cluster. So from a strict standpoint of looking at it as mitigation value to the city, we believe there wasn't any mitigation value to the city. That doesn't mean that we don't agree with those homeowners that they're in untenable situations, but it also could be that a flood resilient home could be built there in the future, right? So that's the very difficult calculus we're making on a lot of these buyout applications. And we know that it's hard, and we know that it's people, these boxes aren't boxes, they're people involved in this, but that's the calculus we're making from a city's interest perspective, which I acknowledge may not be in the residents' interest. So this is just one example where it's very clear, and you can visualize it. This one, so there's more colors on this slide, and I'm afraid this one is actually probably going to have more purple the next time we look at this. But here we have 3 colors. Again, the green are buyouts that we're pursuing, and we've sent applications to those owners to complete. The red are buyouts that are currently not being pursued under FEMA, and then the purple are new buyout intakes after this July's flood. So you can see the green areas are along the brook, the Gunners Brook mitigation, former flood mitigation area that we're looking to expand.
Or is that Harrington?
I'm sorry, Harrington, yes, I'm sorry. And then the one on Dick's Place is one that we see as, it is a single lot, but it's a little bit bigger. And then we think that there's a potential for some mitigation value on that one as well. So that one is proceeding. You can see that, you know, on Brook Street, on the 103 Brook Street and 105 Brook Street, just from a layman's perspective, you know, and I haven't talked even to Brian yet about this, Brian Baker, but those may have some mitigation value, and that's going to be, you know, in a way, you know, we have a year to make that decision. We have some time to decide that because these are intakes that happened after this year's flood. But I think that there could be a reason to see those turning into green boxes as we move into the assessment of more intakes that come as a result of this year's event.
That would be the red adjacent to the purple.
That would be, no, I think that's the purple. That's purple 103 right here on the screen here. So the 103 and I think that's 105, I believe. So that's again, very layman's perspective, but I believe that's a big cluster. And then I have messages from more people on Brook Street, so I'm afraid this list will keep growing. And so there may be a future flood mitigation expansion area there. Those people didn't do intakes last year. They all got hit again this year, and it's difficult conversations. They you know, they're ready to give up, and it's unfortunate. But there does appear to be mitigation value to the city as we move forward, which could complement the mitigation that we're looking to expand further down on Harrington.
So on an earlier A&R report, they recommended some houses on Brook Street, which were closer to North Main Street. And I assume it's those houses that are, because one of them is like, the brook is here and their house is, the porch is really over the brook. And then the brook makes a sharp turn, which is heavily channelized, and and it's a low bridge. I have to assume that the houses there are often hit.
It may be, but I don't believe they haven't been intakes yet. These are the only intakes thus far from both last July and this July's events. So there may be more, and you can see there's some. This is again, it's less evident here than the Vines Campini, but you can see a couple of isolated red and purple squares that again don't have mitigation value to the city as a whole as individual lots. The value starts to come in when there's clusters, because that becomes places where water can rest and save houses downstream. So then this is the last, this is the next area, River Street, Granite Street area. So this is actually one of the areas that our guests highlighted earlier today. This is the one side of the bank here is the Desero property. So that would be restoring it to perhaps what the pictures that they showed us today, something looking more like that. And then across the street, the houses clustered on River Street as well. There's one property owner there who has not sought a buyout, but all the other neighbors in that section have. So we think that we do think there's mitigation value of having both sides of the river with some more room there. At the purple, we have another 2024 intake here. Again, just off the cuff, that looks like a real good area to restore some floodplain. But we have to do, further analysis. I think, I know that it's difficult for the residents who are in the sort of caught in this waiting game, but I think one of the values we've learned is that people don't make this decision right away. It's a difficult, life-altering decision for many people. And so we may not know the full potential list of buyouts for some time. So it could very well be that other property owners adjacent to these owners come on board. But just looking at it like this, that purple property right there could turn to a green because of its location. And there's questions.
Yes.
So is that purple property next door to the park on?
It is.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons we think that it's particularly valuable as mitigation, because it would connect to an existing sort of green space and could reconfigure that. It's adjacent to property the city already owns, so it could really.
And would we be looking at potentially moving that park to help with flood mitigation, to maybe connect more of that river together, or?
I think it's too early to tell. One of the things that could happen is maybe it could, because that park is a little bit elevated as well, so maybe the whole area could be lowered. Mm-hmm. It's possible to have playgrounds on FEMA buyout lands.
Right.
There are just a few restrictions on it. But, so I think it's certainly possible. I think that's why, in my eyes, again, as a layperson, that property appears to have high mitigation value because of its location along the river, because it's adjacent to existing city property. So that, you're right, Councilor Deering, that, really that could turn into a much broader swath of land that becomes flood mitigation down the road.
When you notice when driving down river, that particular business, all of the sand and stuff is washed up among
Yes.
all of those vehicles and completely buried them. So I think that would be a great project.
Yeah.
And to the one homeowner who hasn't decided to pursue a buyout so far, is there, the rest of these buyouts move forward, they get approved, and then a year and a half from now, they decide, yeah, no, I probably could take a buyout. Would they need another qualifying event? Is there a time limit?
I believe one of the things that changes, and I know there's rounds of HMGP funding on cycles, what would drastically alter for them is the offer they're going to be able to get on the house. So my understanding from VEM, and if anyone in the audience knows, they can correct me, but right now, people who get in within this year's application are eligible for the fair market value the day before the event. If you do not get in under this round, you are eligible for fair market value at the time of the buyout. So they would lose basically that, whatever that lost home value in terms of an offer that they would get.
And so is that also true then for, if the council were to say like, no, Nicholas, you're wrong, we're gonna buy out that small red box, is that also true because it's been so long that they would then?
They would have, if the council went that way, they'd get an application tomorrow and they would have to turn that in. We would turn that around to VEM and FEMA. My understanding is that FEMA still has to decide there's a benefit cost to it as part of this as well. So that one in particular may be difficult because, as you can see, it's not technically in a floodplain.
Yeah, I was just picking out because it was on the screen.
Exactly. But there's, it's not an automatic as I understand the process. Yeah. These are landslide buyouts. So these are the homes, Pike Street and Oswald Street. These were approved as well by the council. These are moving forward. There was an isolated home here as well on Howard Street that has not been, and this was not, the Howard Street home was not a landslide, just for clarification. It was just a regular buyout intake. But the two landslide here, the three landslide homes here are captured in this neighborhood. Portland Street also was approved for buyout. That buyout is underway. The Courier Street landslide was also approved for buyout, and that is underway as well. So then I just wanted to show you the additional buyout applicants or intakes that we've received. So this will show you the areas of the city where we have not moved forward with particular applications. This is North Main Street, Maple area. This is my friend Gordon's house is one of these listed here. We had a chat about this today. The Navy home is just, I thought it would be flagged, is one that was on a buyout intake, but this homeowner asked to be removed because they received some assistance from Barre Up actually, and they decided to stay. So that's, I think, a success story right there. They are no longer under consideration. This is a Brooklyn Street area, and you may ask, well, these are clustered, yes, but not along the river. There's structures across the street from these homes, so we believe there's perhaps not the same mitigation value as other parts of the city that we are pursuing. This is Washington Street. Again, we think minimal mitigation value. You can see there the structures are not in the floodplain as well, so this would probably be a challenge with FEMA anyhow.
It's both sides of 302?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
This is Elmore Street. Again, this is along the river. It's sort of the floodplain here is a little bit strange. This hasn't been advanced at this point. This is a little bit larger lot than normal, but it hasn't been advanced as an application by the city This was also a very late comer to the game. Doesn't mean it's not valuable, but just sharing the intakes we have.
And it's not a building, it's just,
It is a building, yes. It's a rental unit.
Multifamily.
Multifamily, yeah. Hill Street, this is an isolated one, again, not in the floodplain, not pursued. And Courier Park, this home is adjacent to a culvert, and again, has had damage, but the measure for us is mitigation value to the city, which is minimal, if any, we believe. This is a new intake this year. This is on Prospect Street, 119, not near the floodplain. And again, I'm not saying not near the floodplain to minimize what these folks are going through. I have no doubt that they've been impacted. It's just it has a perhaps limited FEMA benefit cost threshold, and just mitigation value to the city may be limited. So,
Do you know what the damage to that property was for flooding on Prospect?
not off the top of my head. I have email with the homeowner. I think it's just water in the home from runoff, is my understanding. Yeah. This is one in the downtown, the core downtown. This is 171. I don't want to get too much into the intent. This was what property owner that never confirmed their interest in a buyout. So I don't know if this is someone who, had saw what happened and threw their hands up and said, I got to go, and did an intake, and then, got some help. So I don't know what happened here. The property owner here never confirmed their interest, and in any case, it wouldn't have been pursued by the city, or at least it wouldn't have been recommended by the city to be pursued.
They never confirmed their interest?
Yeah, so what we did is we were taking intakes for several months after the flood. And what we did before we went public with these maps, and, because it's very personal showing, someone's property. We reached out to everybody on the intake list. VEM had started the process. They turned it over to us. And before the February presentation that we did with our initial strategy for buyouts, I'd reached out to everybody, said, hey, you're on this intake list. Are you still interested in a buyout? And this property owner was one that never confirmed that. Everybody else said, yes, we're interested, we're considering it. It's, we want to could still be considered, but this one was one that didn't respond. So I don't know what their intentions were, but in any case, it wouldn't have been one that we recommended to pursue.
So for all you know, it could have just been an inquiry saying,
Very-
gee, I
very
wonder
much
how
so.
this works.
Might as
and-
well, yeah, exactly, just
And then they
throw
just
my name up
didn't
and-
engage, sure.
Yeah, so, I think if we'd seen, just for awareness, I think if we had gotten an intake, for example, the lone homeowner on River Street, right? If they had been on an intake, but they hadn't confirmed interest because the city believes there's mitigation value there, we probably would have been more aggressive in trying to see where they were. This one, we just weren't aggressive because it wasn't one that on the staff level we were thinking
Inclined
would.
to accept anyway.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Counselor Stockwell, do you have a question?
so do we know anything about the timeline for the buyouts that are underway? Do we have any sense of yep, we're going to feel that impact next year on the grand list, or we have no idea?
Unfortunately, it's more of the latter. We've gotten,
Just to be clear, we've likely already felt the impact on the grand list. So we don't have to wait a year to feel that because we've abated tons of taxes, and so that's happening now.
Yes, I
In
understand.
terms of here's your check, that can be a couple of years.
Yeah, and just so you know, the process, so VM has been terrific throughout all of this. We have, I mentioned to the council before, but we have an MOU with them that they manage the process for us, which is very, very helpful. All we do is we communicate with the residents, we make recommendations about which ones to proceed with, and then we mail the application materials to those property owners. Those property owners have to complete them. The forms have to be notarized. We have notaries here at City Hall that the clerk will do that for them if they come in. And those applications may spend a day or two in City Hall, and then I have to sign three or four places, and then they go to VEM. And VEM takes it from there, which is a huge help to us. From VEM, they go to FEMA. The update we got from VEM is that it's one of those updates where like there is no update. There's still, I think FEMA has hired some people and assigned some people to help with these buyouts. But unfortunately, there's no set timeframe for when they'll happen. Not all of the property owners that we've invited to send us the application materials have returned them. I think there's, at this point, 3 or 4 that haven't. And so we've been reaching out to them over the last couple weeks to remind them that there's a deadline coming up. So we'll take it from there. I think the people who got their applications in sooner are likely to get answers faster. But we don't have like a timeframe from VEM or FEMA at this point.
Oh, sorry.
So-
Councilor Wozniak.
The list that you sent Amanda and I is that representative of all the green?
Yes.
So that, yeah,
Yes,
yep.
correct.
Yeah.
Councilor Spaulding.
So I understand the reasoning behind not pursuing a buyout for people who, for homeowners, property owners who are not going to be a part of a flood mitigation plan. But what happens to those people? Because they are in a position where they can't really sell their house and they have nowhere to go. And so I just wonder what happens to them? That we just say,
Yeah.
okay, thanks for living here, and now you have to file bankruptcy and good luck?
Perhaps.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, there's some places where the city could, here on the north end in particular, where there's opportunities to do non-FEMA buyouts. And those are still not easy because the city has to identify the funding to do those buyouts, the city, and not just to do the buyouts, but to do the demolition and the site prep and turn them over to a developer. So even doing a non-FEMA buyout is not an easy prospect for the city anyway. And it may not be an ideal solution for the homeowners because, we're in this position where, we may not be able to offer those people what their fair market, we may not be able to offer what FEMA would offer them in a buyout because the city, on top of a buyout cost, would have demolition cost. That's something FEMA would do in a buyout, right? In a buyout, we show up to accept a deed at closing is all we do now. But in this non-FEMA buyout situation, we have to start thinking about demolition. Just to give you reference, the city paid for the demolition on Portland Street because that was an emergency mitigating factor that we got approved under FEMA. I believe that cost approximately $200,000, right? So if you're looking at, because it's an older home, it's got asbestos, it's got to be watered down as you take it down, it's got to be specially disposed of. So, not saying that they're all going to cost $200,000, but if you look at the city possibly having to do demolition on these types of properties, we're talking big numbers. The city's cost won't be the buyout, it'll be the site prep. So these can't all happen overnight either because there just isn't the financial capacity to do so. But so for some people, this is an option, and it may be their only way out. And for others, unfortunately, that it's not an easy road. And we've talked about it on the council that, I think from the city staff's perspective, if there wasn't the limitation on perpetual green space, there's no reason to keep somebody in the house that keeps flooding. But that is a real barrier to how we have to look at them.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hall?
Mr. Hall again.
Mr. Hall, could you come to the microphone? Because folks have said they can't.
Watch your head.
I've sat too long already. Can you hear me okay now?
Yep, you can sit if you'd like.
It's worse. Number 19, number 21, 23, and 25, are the city gonna buy them out?
Yes. In fact, yes.
I can save you the cost of demolition them and make a deal with you. Because if you heard a company named Messier House Moving, it's in Berlin, they can be taken down to 13.6 or 12.6. and then removed out of there in one big shot, right up the interstate and gone. And I can have him hold those 3 houses.
Yeah.
If you're willing to buy them out. I don't know if Betty DeForge is selling hers, but I think, I've heard the one down below me, 23 and 25 has already been sold to the state of Vermont.
So no one's bought anything yet on Vine Street.
On our property it was held, because I've been keeping in touch with delinquent taxes, sellouts, buyouts and everything. And I saved the garage by putting a new roof on it, 4 foot up a few years ago, because it was gonna collapse if I didn't.
Right.
And I would love to tear those places down quick, get them out of there so it'd save you a city demolition cost.
I appreciate that. I think that from my understanding of this process is that it's a FEMA process soup to nuts. So they handle the demolition, they handle the site prep. What they turn over to the city is a space with a deed. So I will certainly talk to our VEM partners about that. But the city's role, and this isn't a deflection, right? The city's role is to say, yes, this property is compelling for buyout, so please complete this application. And then assuming it goes through the process, the city's next step is, after it's approved, is to show up at the closing and to accept a deed, right? We don't set the prices for the buyout. We don't manage the demolition. We don't manage, they turn us over a completed property. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about FEMA. When I bought that house, I had to get flood insurance that day to finish it, close it to 802 Credit Union. The first flood, I had flood insurance. The furnace alone cost me $2,500 I put in there. I replaced every copper pipe in that house because it was a foreclosure, okay? FEMA wrote me a check for $100. When they came down the second year, I said, if you offer me $100, you can get off my land. Don't ever come back again. And that was Irene. And I've already told you the rest story, building up, helping save people that were dying and everything else that would have gone through that flood down from Woodstock all the way through. And those people will vote for me for a governor. I'll guarantee it for what I did and the people I've talked around the city. Because I'm willing to stand my ground. That house that we owned, the boards are that wide. They can be run through a planer and build another house with it. Guy in Corinth does it. He's a good friend of mine. He's got the planer. That's why I want that house in the end, and the one next to it. And I don't know about Betty's house because her daughter's gonna get it. But I want those in the buyout. I wanna move them up to a high piece of land out in Orange, and I wanna build a veterans place for veterans. But I also want my daughter to have her $100,000 out of that place. It's not booked that high in your taxes. But she re-renovated that house after my wife and I got a divorce. My wife got a consensual divorce. I've never signed off the property because of the floods. So I am fighting for my daughter and my ex-wife. The money that I get from that project's going to them so she can build a new house in Virginia. She's moving out of this area because of everything else. I thank you very much for what you did this afternoon in the playground after we had our conversation. But I got pictures. Over 17 kids were in that playground tonight before I came to this meeting. That's why I was late. And yes, sir, I was promised 2 years ago that fence was going to be changed. It's dangerous the way it is, and I can show you in a picture. The bar's hanging down. The fence is backed in there. It's been that way 2 years now. Kids have climbed on that fence and got tore open. And I've gone out there, my daughter's gone out there and said, get off the fence. Or the piece of pipe that was laying down, there was cement on it sideways. They were jumping on when they were trying to do basketball hoops. That fence is dangerous. It can go along the river and be used down there and spray painted. But we need to get in there with a bucket loader, and I'm dead serious, and get that mud out of there and all that stuff, and then just put sawdust down if you had to. Make it safer for these kids. We have them all over the city come to that area. And that's the God's honest truth. You can spend a day down there and you can see it. Especially the weekends. And before I left, I warned these people, do not go underneath that fancy playground we got there because it's got that much mud and your kids are gonna get sick. But thank you for what you did for me today, Nick. I appreciate it very much. And that's the end of that story, but that way I could save you demolition of 3 buildings if Betty DeForge decides to let hers go, and I can get Messier moving at my expense. Move those 3 buildings right up to Berlin, right out of the way, quick. then you can get in there and do what you want with the 0.11 acres I own and whatever the other ones were. That's just a suggestion to you. Because I'll run every board through a planer. They've already been gutted 4 foot up. We had 41 inches of water the last time I was in that house. I saved 2 dogs. Electricity never went off. Oh, God Almighty saved my life. 41 inches of water inside the house. When I moved 2 dogs up to the 2nd floor and locked the door so they couldn't get out, I reached their dog food and I couldn't even save that. I came out, stepped off the porch like this. Water was this level. Power was still on in my house. And I walked the 4 or 5 feet after I tied this Bayliner boat with an 85 horsepower motor to the front porch, because I already watched all the kayaks, all the base. My daughter was, just a second. My daughter was head of Troop 717, Boy Scouts. She was stuck up in Eden. I had no idea where she was. I was staying at the Pierre Motel on the 2nd floor. I saw the rain, I saw this flood coming in my mind, because I watched that river constantly, ever since the first flood. And I couldn't get a hold of her. I had no idea where, because she was out of service. But I watched all the canoes. I watched the Boy Scout stuff that was in the 1st floor. We threw it across the road, big piles of it. Thank goodness the Baptist Church, which are back in the same area, Southern Baptist.
Mr.
I
Hall,
met them today
Mr.
and
Hall,
said,
you're drifting
I
a
know
bit
I'm
on me
drifting,
again, buddy.
But I just want to finish this.
Okay.
They came in and helped us empty those 3 houses. And my neighbor just below me was handicapped. He kept falling down and I'd help him pick up. And we cut them all to 4 foot. We had 51 inches in the backyard on the garage. Mark is still on the back. And I don't want to go through it again.
Understood.
I'm glad I saved my own life and God was watching over me, because I should have been laid out flat, electrocuted, but it didn't happen. That's my last statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Amy Galford.
Amy, did you have a question?
I do. So on the pink mapping there, I think those are the FEMA flood maps, and there's 2 different zones. The broad pink is the 1% or 100-year floodplain, and then the hatched area is the floodway. Is that correct?
Yep.
So to me, the floodway is the higher risk area. That's even higher than 1%, and that's basically where the river is going to be during a flood. But I didn't see that mentioned, and it doesn't look like that's been used as a criterion for picking who gets a buyout and who doesn't. So those 2 red houses are in the hatched area there. And as I've said before, they are lower in elevation than the Berlin Street Bridge. That's why the water goes over there is before the Berlin Street Bridge is clogged or overflowing, or when it does, the water is flowing into those. And the other criteria there is how close properties are to the river. So everyone should have a visual of the distance of those 2 properties from the river. And then if you back up to the numbered streets, and certainly we know the floodplain maps are, wildly out of date. But the numbered streets are flooding because of the debris clogs primarily. They're not in the floodway for the immediate water hitting them. And a lot of those in the numbered streets, the east side of the numbered streets, not the west 2nd shown there, but the east 2nd Street and those cluster, those are not adjacent to the river. So I think as a fairness thing, I'm just sticking up for my neighbors on Berlin Street there. It's really hard for me to see the fairness when those are houses that have flooded 3 or 4 times now, and they are lower than the bridge. They are close to that buyout cluster. And I don't see what the fair market value of those houses is going to be from here on. The one, I can't tell if it's included in that red square or not, but there's a house I think it's not, but there's a house there that's flooded repeatedly that's been on the market for a year and it hasn't sold. And almost anything is selling fast these days. So I'm just having a little trouble reconciling the numbered streets on the first slide versus here. And when there are commercial properties off Granite Street, where part of the property is, again, not in the floodway, and the commercial property is getting a full buyout, and the residential property here is not.
Yeah, I mean,
and I
Amy,
guess just one last thing about that is I don't know if there's a difference between the floodway and the 1% flood chance in terms of what you can rebuild. You were talking about those the red block there, potentially flood proofing and building it. Is that actually true that somebody could be allowed to rebuild in that area?
You can mitigate it, elevate it. So yeah, I mean, Amy, you're right. It's gut-wrenching decisions. They're difficult. As I said, all those boxes they're not boxes, they're people. The standard we've had to look at is mitigation value to the city, and we believe that these represent the mitigation value to the city. So that's, I'm not saying that they're not deserving of a buyout under normal circumstances, but we also say we're in a housing crisis, and if there's a parcel that can be saved, that's that's where we've erred on the side of saving. So, again, I don't disagree that they're difficult, and that, if there wasn't that standard of no further development, I think it would be no-brainers.
Yes.
Council Zach actually was.
So on that, the first thing I wrote down when we got to buyouts is I want to approve Nick's buyout. There are no normal circumstances under which we would pursue a buyout. We're pursuing these buyouts in the first place because it's not going to be abnormal in the future, unfortunately, but because we're in unprecedented times here. And on the housing crisis thing, like Amy just said, there's a house that's not selling because it floods, and it's not. Nick's family is not living in a housing unit that is, in my opinion, a real housing unit, because yeah, there's a structure there, but it's not safe to live in under the current environmental circumstances that neighborhood is experiencing. So, I mean, Nick doesn't want to be there. No one else is going to want to buy that house as is. The elevation process is going to take forever, and if we know that the water is flowing there from the Berlin Street Bridge, I don't see how it doesn't provide at least some space for water to go to.
It very well may. I mean, we believe that the larger block of space is a better place to catch water. It has more geographic space to do so. So I acknowledge it's difficult. The difference is that house may not be selling now, but if it's bought out, it's not selling ever, and there will never be a property on it. So, it's certainly, it's absolutely the council's decision. I mean, our calculus is that we just don't think it has the value, and we have to draw difficult lines all the time. So that's where we landed. But if the council's will is different, I mean, they'll get an application tomorrow.
I think my 1 of 7 is I think they should.
Linda, you've had your hand up for a while. I apologize.
Aren't I patient? So I thought we were looking at city buyouts because we started with the north end where my property is, but that has been denied a FEMA buyout, and it's now in the running for a city buyout. But I don't know how much it's worth, or I don't know any of that stuff, so I'm going to find out. But my neighbors were also in the same cluster for a city buyout, and they understood that 200-something thousand was being offered for their house, but they had to tear it down themselves, pay for the tear down, which was $177,000. Does that make any sense?
It's certainly not anything the city's communicated to them. So I don't know where people are hearing that, but it's, the city hasn't talked to anybody about any prices for any homes. So I have talked to folks who received the options. If they have, what I advise them to do is to, have an attorney look at it. And if they're interested, then we deploy the assessors to start moving through the process. But I just want to be very absolutely clear, the city has not talked to anybody who's got an option about any prices for their property.
Okay. All right. And so in our case, we're a land trust property. The only value of that property to us is if we live in it. If we don't live in it, there's no value to us if we sell it. So in that case, if the city's going to pay $200,000 to have our home torn down, couldn't the city pay that to have our home mitigated. I know you want to build an apartment building there, but you know, an apartment building for 6 people and you're displacing 6 families, so it doesn't even make sense. So if we could use that tear down money for mitigation money, maybe that would make sense. We're not next to the river.
Maybe it does. I mean, I think that they don't all cost $200,000. That was an example of what it may be. So the goal is to, you know, when we talked about this in February, and in that particular cluster, was that, you know, we looked at the footprint of the building just above it, that it could replace the units that are on that property now. So it could be a net gain of units. The other piece is that, you know, we've talked about these development efforts as not being solely city money. So as we know that there's been congressionally directed spending applications made to Congress to help support these projects as well. So these, you know, we're not talking specifically city dollars that would be coming through to do this project. It can't be just city dollars to do these projects. So lots of variables, Linda, but I think that the goal, I think as we presented it back in February, was net new units on places that where buyouts occur, which was the case in the cluster that you're located in.
There's 4 properties, 5 families, and you're going to build 6 units. So there's 5 families being displaced to build a 6-unit apartment building.
No, I mean, Linda, what we talked about.
That's what you told me.
No, there could be 2, possibly 2 buildings of that size built on that property. I mean, it's all hypothetical anyway. I mean, we've looked at the footprint of that cluster, and we think based on the footprint of the building just above it that if something like that were matched, it could be. I believe that building has 6 units. It could be 2 of those, so it could be double that. In any case, it's all hypothetical, but the goal would be, I think the goal should be to have net growth of units in any place where buyouts have to occur.
Take your pick, you got a few.
I just want to say, I think it's really also important that we're building back in a flood resilient way and not just putting more units online, Linda. I think that.
No, I know. And I want my house to be flood resilient and I want to live in it. But I don't have the money to invest $200,000 in my house. But it seems like someone's willing to invest $200,000 in tearing it down. You know, it's a disturbance. And that's what the neighbors feel. They don't really want, nobody had their house on the market. And those four houses, no one had the house on their house. No one was trying to get out of there.
Yeah, well, Linda,
And now
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but that is not, what you're saying makes perfect sense, but it simply isn't a program available to the city. City doesn't have, so the FEMA program that allows for the removal of a home, unfortunately, the FEMA program doesn't allow for flood mitigation, for raising the home or doing some mitigation efforts. And that's simply not, I mean, it's not something that the city could undertake. It's not something we have the budget for.
Right, and your budget is, what I just heard tonight was that FEMA pays fair market value a day before, but you won't. So I was denied the FEMA, which might have been a little more money. And now you're going to set the price for my house. There's no negotiation. Right, Nick? You said you're going to.
I don't know how else to explain it, Linda, but there's the process is not easy. It's not a way out. As I've explained it, when I've talked about it publicly, it pits homeowners against the municipality, and I think that's what you're describing. And I agree with what's been said, that it's difficult for the homeowner, it's difficult for the city. The homeowners, for many people, their home is their largest personal asset. For the city, properties are a source of revenue. And so at the city, we have the city staff has the task of trying to make recommendations based on the best interest of the city. And I understand that sometimes the best interest of the city is not the best interest of an individual resident, and that's very difficult. But that's exactly what you're running up against. I wish it wasn't like that, but.
Yeah, and I think
the
it
rules
could
of the
be not
program.
like that. You could say to these four properties, let's help you get back on your feet.
Councilor Guston?
I would like to learn a little bit about how the funding that the state approved for elevation is being deployed relative, especially to some of those red boxes that you had indicated.
Yeah, I think that those are really good candidates for it. What we're doing now, what we've done is try to get intakes for that as well, so that we know the full range of homeowners that are interested in that. We've looking at the substantial damage homes, looking at those homes that are in those red boxes, as you mentioned, Councilor Guston. So what we're trying to gather is the universe of people who may be interested in that, so that then those funds can be deployed in a way that is, at least people know it's accessible and available, and then decisions can be made by the council about where the best where the best investments are for that funding. Now that funding, it was 3.5 million statewide. It'll, as we understand, it'll be $700,000 for Barre City. That may cover 2 or 3. So and as at last count, we had, I believe, 9 really good candidates, interested candidates for it. So that's going to leave, again, 6 or more property owners for whom that will not be an option.
Vermont Emergency Management said that that's only one pot of money
I
that 2
didn't
or 3
recognize you,
talk
Linda.
about.
Councilor Stockwell?
Sorry, Linda, I'm sure we'll come back to you.
I know where I stand.
I was wondering if we could use the EPA Community Change Grant to consider city buyouts for some of these properties and rebuild them better, but much better. Rebuild them as energy efficient places with improved infrastructure. Is that a possibility?
In this round?
Yeah.
No,
For the EPA grant?
no, not even close.
But
I
it's
mean,
what
there
they're-
just isn't the time. We're struggling to get the grant, the projects that have been identified. We're struggling to get that grant completed, as the manager had said, for technical review tomorrow. So to change course now, in this round, I'm not saying we couldn't do it in the future, it's just not practical or possible.
Does the money that's available through VEM, is that flexible money so that you could pay people what their property is worth or more?
For buyouts?
For city buyouts?
For city buyouts.
I mean, can you use it even for
I
city
don't believe, so
buyouts?
it's all FEMA pass-through. So FEMA pass-through means that it still has FEMA rules of perpetual green space, unfortunately.
If someone wanted to submit an application through the city, they can do that. They could submit their own application. We've talked about that several times in previous meetings. However, the city is ultimately the applicant, and the city would have to be paid. The city would be responsible for administering the grant, and obviously there'd be a cost to the homeowner. But we've talked about that several times at council meetings, that if an individual wants to submit a VEM grant through the city, they can do that.
For elevations and such.
Right.
I think buyouts still require, just for clarification, buyouts require city sign off, which again, it's the council's decision. But an elevation, we told VEM for the Barre Day that the city was supportive of any and all sort of elevation type projects, that we would be okay with those. Frankly, even in the clusters, I think it's not really, it's somebody's home, right? So if they want to elevate it, even if it eliminates a cluster for development, that's somebody's right? It's their property. But just for clarification, the buyouts would still require city signature, which again would require ultimately council approval.
The other thing is I want to go back to Councilor Wazazak's suggestion about the buyouts that are in the red block and suggest that we consider giving those folks buyouts.
I would be a hard no. This is a program designed to mitigate for the city. You know, if you don't listen to these stories and you're not heartbroken, then you're not human and you shouldn't be sitting on the council. I mean, I feel that way. But if we start messing with the process, that slope is going to turn so slippery, so fast. And what is supposed to be a mitigation program will turn into a popularity contest. We need to listen to the manager. You know, I know Nick and his family. They're wonderful people. I'd love to help them. That's not the purpose of the program. The purpose of the program is, as the manager keeps saying, mitigation, effective mitigation through the city. We listen to these folks tonight. We know damn well we don't have enough money to do all of these projects, and we can't do them quickly enough. So we have to be very judicious about the way we go about things.
But we also don't know the mitigation value of those properties, especially if they're connected to the green block.
Based upon the location of the homes, I can't sit here and argue with or question anything the manager is telling me. Everything that he's telling me makes perfect sense, and they've made decisions based on a certain set of criteria. And if I saw them straying from that criteria, I might feel differently, but I don't. So again, it's, you know, these are not easy decisions, but I think we are best served when we listen to the manager and we don't attempt to influence. We simply allow him to do his job. And again, I'm not aware that in terms of the criteria that the entire city staff, not just the manager, set forth, this is consistent with that criteria. Linda, gonna come back to you now, Linda, if you had another comment or question. Oh, Linda's still there? Oh, Linda may have jumped off. Councilor Wazazak, do you have a?
I was just going to, I almost always defer to Nicholas, but the council's job is to provide oversight of the manager. And that doesn't mean that anyone, to your point, Tom, did anything wrong or is, you know, trying to be cold-hearted, but they don't always get it right. And I think that our job as elected officials is to ensure that we are helping as many people as possible with the programs that are available to us. And like Amy pointed it out, the thing is in the floodway. The water goes from the Berlin Street Bridge into those houses. And if those houses were not there, that would be space for the water to go to. We don't have to, you know, overcomplicate this. And I don't think that it's any of us shirking hard decisions. I mean, the rest of the hard decisions are like the people in the North End that have been flooded a million times that we're not offering buyouts to right now. This one seems to me like a very good candidate for these buyouts. And just to reiterate, Councilor Stockwell, yes, the community, I fully agree that it's not possible this time around, but the community change grants are going to be rolling. And part of the flood plan that Councilor Gustin and I have been working on, a suggestion in there is to have the Washington Street by Trow and Holden buyout request, the Brooklyn Street buyout request, and the North End clusters, in theory, could be developed into something in the future that could be a community change grant application. So, you know, I respect your hard no, Mr. Mayor, but if we can get 4 votes on the thing, I would very much like to do it.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so can you explain to me, because the North End slide is the only one with city buyouts, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so you just said that city buyouts also come through FEMA?
No, they wouldn't go through FEMA.
Did you just say that, though?
No.
There's nuance missing. The city has to sign off on any FEMA buyouts.
Yeah.
Which is different than a city-sponsored buyout using.
But you
city
just
money
said
for
something
it.
about money that comes,
Yeah.
I
passes through.
think Councillor Stockwell had asked about VEM money, but that is the $90 million that we're applying for is FEMA passing through the state, which still has FEMA rules.
Okay, so these yellow squares for the north end are not, they're something that the city is looking to buy out, or they're non-FEMA buyouts, and they would be, we would rebuild
They
on
could be
those.
redeveloped. So they're unfortunately a little bit in the middle, right? So there's some properties here that could have potential as FEMA mitigation, as mitigation right along North Main, for example. But many of these, certainly the ones away from North Main Street could be better served as redevelopment, right? So this is where the city could put in more housing units. When in February, when we first presented this, we had talked about in this, I don't know if you can see the mouse up there, but in this cluster right here, this is the biggest cluster, obviously. And then what we did very rudimentary with Tess was we took the footprint of this building and we could fit 2 of them in here, right? So, this building, I believe, has 6 units. So in theory, right, could be 6 unit buildings here that could fit the character of this neighborhood. Maybe you can't quite fit 2 6-unit buildings there, but maybe you can get a 6 and a 4, or 2 5s. The thing is that we thought there's a way to get more than 4 houses on that lot, right? The other part of that plan was to redevelop Wabi Park, which the council approved the plan with Down Street at the last meeting. Part of that plan would be to relocate Wabi Park, which could, result in, maybe a lot like this or a lot like this becoming a future park, right along North Main Street. The reason this is a little bit more in limbo is because this is a bigger focus area, and the potential, I think, would be better informed knowing what the ultimate site control would be, right? So there could still be additional buyout intakes that come in over time. There could be buyout intakes that come in after this year's flood. And so these clusters have the potential to grow, and giving all of them up without development would just be too difficult, right? It's too much lost real estate.
Yes, sir.
I need to know, all I've ever dealt with on that house on Vine Street is the tax department. I never received anything in the mailbox, to my knowledge, unless somebody stole it, about a buyout plan or anything.
Your
like
daughter's been involved. Let's not talk about this in a public meeting, but I think your daughter's been involved on your behalf.
that. Taxes only that
No, I believe she's on the, why don't you come to my office tomorrow? Because I'd rather not talk about.
We can discuss it then. I just need the forms, so I want to get them filled out.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Anything else? Okay. We are. You've been patient, Gordon. Come on up.
Yeah, thanks. I tried to play encore to George Burns, or the former pre-governor here. President, we ain't got much. Might get it. All right. Thanks, Nicholas, for your help this afternoon, and Mr. Mayor. I guess what I'm looking for is transparency or more clarity or sense of.
Could you turn that mic a little bit towards you and pull it down, just.
And introduce
not too
yourself.
close, and pull it down a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Could you tell us who you are?
Gordon George.
Thank you.
Properties 408 North Main Street, right beside Denty's Market. My son's married to a Denty girl, and I've lived in Barre 2-3 times before that. But if you live up high and dry, you're not conscientious of floods. I know that Barry's had them, but I never really noticed it. But we bought this old place. My son was renting from Denty, and him and Karen were gonna, I guess the old city records, it's an old duplex. They were gonna fix up the right side of the house and whatnot. So I said, well, if you wanna do that, we'll buy it. So that's what we did. Unfortunately, after about a year, my son and his wife decided they didn't want to live there. I probably should have taken them up on that myself, but hindsight will tell you the right way. So we bought it in 2010. A year later, it was a Thursday night, May 26th, 2011 was the first flood. Now, that wasn't Irene, that was August 26th, 3 months later, and I thought we were going to go through it again. The river came that far from going over the Stevens branch. But that was 2011, and then 4 years later, July 15th, it was a Sunday night. I was home to watch that one. And this is an old house, 135-year-old house, granite block foundation, that's Barre, eh? With a dirt floor, so you don't keep anything down there. But on that flood, I went down the steps, and I mean, it's not like modern concrete walls. You look around, and all 4 walls, the water just coming through like fire hoses. And I think 7.5 feet cellar, it fills it up within half an hour. Some pump doesn't keep up. And if it did, the Green Mountain Power will shut it off anyway, the power off, but it wouldn't keep up anyway. Now, so those 2 floods were in the cellar. I mean, you open the cellar door and bang, it's right there, 7.5 feet. Well, you don't keep anything down there. You just have Dean Preston, he repairs your hot air furnace, puts in an old electric hot water heater and a minimum of new circuit breakers. And you lug the muck out, or the silk's the correct word, because I'll tell you, that's exactly what it is. It doesn't even bond to your old dirt. Once you get an error open, you got your pails down there, you take your hole out, and it slides right over your, it's nasty stuff. Doesn't even bond to your regular dirt floor. But 157 5-gallon pails, and then in July of 2015, it was 171 and a half. I counted them 2 by 2. Well, anyway, getting on with this, that's when I should have got out of there, but that's hindsight. Well, last year was 8 years, and last year was devastating. The house is gone. I don't want to live there anymore. You're living in fear. I said after last year's flood, man, I've had 3 in 12 years' time, 11 or 12 years. I said, you know, it may be another 6, another 8, another 4 years, but it's going to happen again. A year to the day. But I just want some clarity here. I've been to all the meetings, the abatement of the taxes, and proving that the house was substantially damaged and all this stuff, and I wouldn't dare to live there anymore. So really what I'm looking for is, actually what brought me here today was this article right here, which we talked about, Nicholas. I did make the meeting it'd be 3 weeks ago this Thursday up to the auditorium, or what they call it, the alumni building attached to the auditorium. It was Vermont Emergency Management, and I got a letter from the city saying it would be about elevations and mitigation and repairs that you might want to do to the property. Although the admission was buyouts. So I had my daughter go, and she said, well, Dad, it doesn't say buyouts are going to be talked about. I said, well, no, but it's Vermont Emergency. And we went to the door, it said Barre Residence Day, and it said the other 2 things, plus it said buyouts. So I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that didn't go because it wasn't specifically said the third thing, buyouts, but I'm not trying to pick on you, Nicholas. But what I want is direction here more than anything else. I had to get the
city fire chief to come. I had to work on him. He was supposed to meet like 3 weeks, actually 2 weeks after the flood, and he had my daughter and I waiting there, and I said, well, he's not gonna show up, Danielle, I'll go down. Oh, forget it. So this was months and months after I finally got him to come, and he came the same two as the two Martins there, the assessors. And they know it's badly damaged, and FEMA knew it was badly damaged. The man from FEMA said, you know what they do with this house where I'm from? I said, no, where are you from? He said, Florida. I said, you're all the way from Florida? Don't have any local? He said, no, but he said they'd tear it down. I said, well, so what my thing is, for a whole year, you've been living in unsettled times. This weather isn't going to change overnight. I want out, and I want clarity or direction more than anything else of how to do that. When I did go to the meeting, the only thing the city loses is tax revenue. I said, well, don't the city pay towards it? And they said, no, supposedly 75% comes from FEMA and 25% from the state, in theory. And they say the way it would work is they would compare it with other houses, just like a realtor would, and list in your house for sale, and come up with fair market value. You accept it or you don't. I said, oh, okay, well. But this paper is what brought me in, and because one of these meetings, I don't know if it was Carol Dawes or Janet Chatney, I don't know. She said that basically there was 86 houses imperiled in Barre, and 38 or 40 were moving or would like buyouts. Well, the city knew I was one, and Vermont Emergency Management knew I was one. And when I was up to that meeting, Cheryl came over and said, because I said, well, when do you get the forms or applications to fill out? From you guys, Vermont? No. Chatney said it'd come from us. But with my conversation today, Nicholas said that I probably won't be available for that. It's got to be in a cluster. Now, that's not to say that my house is not as badly damaged as one's, but if I'm not in a cluster, I guess I'm, as the old saying, out of luck. But then he gave me this form and said, no, you got this, of a city. So I don't know what to do here. I need some direction, some guidance, or so there's no way that, well, you said you recommend it to Vermont Emergency or FEMA, so there's no way my house is going to get recommended for a FEMA buyout.
I would recommend it first to the council, which I haven't done. But the council could change that.
Yeah. I'm just
yeah,
looking
so
for direction.
I shared with Gordon, who I feel I can call you Gordon, who's in my office so
That's
much.
my name, Gordon George.
But yeah, I shared, I shared with Gordon, look, it hasn't been our recommendation to advance your property for a FEMA buyout because of all the reasons we mentioned, which you were accurate in summarizing our conversation.
Yeah.
So I mentioned to Gordon that there is an option that is through a non-FEMA buyout. I shared with him the standard option form that we've shared with many other homeowners. Gordon is not in one of those north end clusters, but he's one of those people that Councillor Spalding mentioned, like the sort of caught in the middle. So again, that's not an executed document. The council still have to approve an option if we went that way. But I think it's, it's Gordon's story is like the Roos's story, except his story was in VT Digger. And, everybody who's in a red box on that map has a story like Gordon's or the Roos's. And so
Who's the Roos's?
that's just the other property we've been talking about. So I just highlighted as, yes, there's a compelling case on Berlin Street, but Mr. George has an equally compelling case. We applied the same standard, and I had to tell Gordon no, at least not from the city's perspective, from the city staff recommendation, right? That we hadn't advanced it. But there's, you know, every red box on that map has a story similar to Gordon's. And so I talked to him about this being an option that eventually the council would have to weigh in on as well. I explained to him that, you know, it's unlikely the city could offer the full value because we have the additional costs on top of it. Again, it doesn't have a purchase price on it, but it's an avenue for some people that sort of tries to find a middle ground between the very rigid FEMA rules and the fact that people are stuck in homes that may not be good for them to be in anymore.
Right.
So.
Well, you hear ghost stories about FEMA taking years to come through as well. I just would like to put this to bed, you know, one way or the other, so I need direction of what I should do here.
So,
I mean, I'm not looking to put anybody on the spot or anything else, but,
Okay, can I ask a few questions? So to
Sure.
summarize, you want to buy out,
well,
you're not really eligible for a FEMA buyout. It's not in the floodway?
oh, it's in the
Yes,
floodplain.
It is in the floodway, but it's not part of our cluster, and you're on the same side as Dentes, and you're not across the street from Dentes.
No, it's on the same side, isn't
Same
it?
side.
I'm across
Okay.
from the beverage baron, but what I was gonna say, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, is the river's right behind me.
Right.
And I mean, right beside the house is the railroad tracks. Sicard from Barton dug down here
Yes.
several years ago.
Yeah, so I understand your location. So the problem is,
Yeah.
how do you get out of your place?
How do you, what?
How do you get away out of the place that you own?
Oh, you're right, yeah.
Okay, so thanks, I got that. And
I mean-
there isn't an easy way out.
No, I don't think, I mean, the way out for someone in this position is, I mean, unless the council approves a buyout for Mr. George, is perhaps through a non-FEMA buyout or a sale. And I'm trying to get the map up here so you can see Mr. George's house.
Yeah.
His house is, you can see on the mouse there, it's right 408. So he's just not clustered. I mean, it's not a crime. It's just a reality of the circumstance. So just for visual, so you can see where Mr. George's house is.
Well, again, I'm just, living it for a year, you know, whether it comes from FEMA or the city, I just like to know a direction that I should be headed for. That's all. Nothing more. But you know, I'm getting a little off the subject here, but all the time you see the governor and all these people making things completely resilient. My grandmother once said years ago, fire is terrible. You might be able to stop a house fire, but flooding, that's a different story. But Tom, you remember up on well, this was after Irene, they took a couple houses down on Harrington Avenue, just made a little floodplain with the green things coming up. And up where the old city dump was, I think you might be old enough to remember the old city dump.
I do.
Where the playground is, they went in and did the same thing there. Did they help any? No, we still have floods. They did. Matter of fact, they'll hold trees and stuff back, which is one thing, but that's the same thing as having trees in a river where it acts as a overflow. It's like March 11th of 92, Montpelier, the ice overflow. It's the same idea. I remember one of these meetings, a gentleman said, well, dredge the rivers, clean them up. And Nicholas, you yourself said, well, that doesn't do any good. And he said, how so? He said, you said, because I read some article once in a book that it doesn't work. You remember that, see? But how, even if you don't want to dig them down, of course, the environment, well, you can't move this, you can't do that, because you might hurt a tree that's fallen down. Well, that's getting a little ridiculous. Bobby Belleville, there was a car down by the old boiler block building, the old Jones Brothers. They had get it out, but environment was there. Well, be careful doing it this way, you might hurt a tree. A tree that's fallen down in the river? What is it coming to? So what's my best
synopsis here to do.
It sounds like we could consider a city buyout.
Yeah.
That would be an option.
Yeah, I'm open to anything here. I just want to lay this baby to rest here. It's
Quickly?
It's eating me out, Tom.
It's not gonna happen.
No?
Maybe people are telling you that it is, they're not being honest with you.
There's no,
There are not
there's no
great
quick.
programs, even a city purchase option, as we've looked at in some properties in the north end. Chances are it would be months, perhaps years
Well,
before. we could
FEMA
bring-
would be longer than, you
It
know, I
could-
mean,
They could very well be. So the city we could consider a city buyout. You could consider mitigation funds. The city, as a manager mentioned, will be getting some mitigation funds. You could plan on applying for those.
mitigation funds, how, what you mean?
Raise your home.
Oh, I don't want to do that. I just said I'm going to do a thing. I haven't done a
Flood
thing.
insurance didn't cover you?
Huh?
Flood insurance
Well, I
didn't?
didn't have flood insurance. But if you ask Mr. Denty, that doesn't amount to anything anyway. I said,
Mr. Denty's not here to ask.
Well, I'm here and I can verify flood insurance doesn't help a bit.
well, Mr. Denty used to have it, and that's why he doesn't have it today, because if you lose stuff, it costs modern day money to fix it. But with national flood insurance, well, they say, well, your boiler's the 10,000 replace it. Well, it's 25 years old, so here's 1,000. But anyway,
As you do in your house. But I got a cement floor and it's broken.
Okay, folks, you need to keep the conversation with the
okay,
council.
so,
Thank you.
but Nicholas gave me this to fill out, or if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're saying it's not gonna work either? Is that what you're saying, Tom?
I don't think I said that at all.
Or what did you say then?
I said it would take time.
Well,
It would take time for the city to even consider it in terms of the big difference between the FEMA buyout, and this is the part of the FEMA buyout that I dislike the most. You can never put another property there. So even if you built this podium-style building, even if we changed the course of the river, even if by some miracle climate change reversed itself,
Right, yeah.
okay? You can never put a property there. It is a huge flaw in that FEMA program because the city has to be so careful about affecting a FEMA buyout, because once we do, there's not an application. An engineer can't go back to FEMA and say, well, the city did that in 2024. And now it's 2224. It's 200 years later, and technology has evolved to the point where we could put a piece of, could put something there. You can't do it. It's perpetually prohibited. That's why we have to be so careful with the FEMA buyouts, not to mention that it deteriorates the tax base, the city's grant list, because no one can ever build there. The property is effectively worthless. City-owned, so we can't assess property taxes on it anyway. That program, like I said, it could take, not saying the council wouldn't consider it, I'm just saying that if you're sitting before the council saying, and this is what I'm hearing, I don't blame you, you want some direction, you want some finality to what you're going through, I wish I could provide that to you, Gordon. I can't.
Well, who can?
I mean, we could certainly consider that,
mean,
but even that is not going to be a 30-day process.
Well,
Right, so,
that's not what I'm looking for. FEMA would take years.
So if you
So
do
what's
want to
the
complete
difference?
that, we can certainly consider it.
right, and it's not a
If
guarantee,
I'm
Gordon.
not gonna get it, the buyout from FEMA, this is my next step, is what I'm trying to say.
It's a, right, what I mentioned, Gordon, it's a possibility, right? Like, that's the non-FEMA way to do it, right? Because we
Right.
were talking about, I was explaining why the FEMA option hasn't been recommended for your property, right? And the reason it hasn't been recommended for your property is because it's not clustered with other properties along the river, right? So we got to talking about what is the non-FEMA option, and I shared with you, this is the non-FEMA option. Now, there's many things I can do as manager, executing an option is not one of them, but that's something if you reviewed it with a lawyer and you were comfortable with it, that's something I can speak to the council about. It doesn't guarantee that it happens. But this was to tell you, like, this is the way to go about a buyout without FEMA in the middle. Even that is not months, it's years plus, because of the option period anyway that's in there, and it's securing funding to do it. So it's not, having that piece of paper is not the guarantee that that's the route it goes. It's just a way for the council and the city to consider whether that's an appropriate approach for your property.
Amy Gelford has her hand up.
Amy? But this is the better way to go in the city's eyes, right? Because FEMA, it goes back to perpetuity and you can't do nothing. Amy? I guess.
I just want to point out again, I'm struggling to understand the prioritization process. Where the maps on the PowerPoint cut
You might
off.
be experiencing, you're sounding like Max Headroom. You might have some internet difficulty.
Is that better?
No.
Can you hear me?
No,
Kind
it's
of.
weird. All of a
There's a-
sudden you're
There's an echo.
echoing.
An echo.
Okay, I'll just try to be quick. I'll just say, the way the PowerPoints are cut, 417 and 425 are on one slide and 408.
Yeah,
It's
you're
not
not
on-
coming through at all, Amy. I'm sorry. You were. Maybe you could try logging on, logging off, logging back on.
Or put it in the chat.
Put it in the chat, we could read it.
Yeah.
I'll try that.
Do what?
Put it in the chat.
Oh,
She could just type out whatever she was trying to say.
uh, 427 Main Street are
Yeah, they're
shown.
adjacent to a creek.
Correct.
They are close by, but yes, Amy, they are close by, but they're not adjacent, correct?
Exactly.
That's the issue.
Councilor Guston, I believe, has a,
Yeah, and we usually say that chat is only used for technical difficulties, not communication. It's
this is
kind
a
of tough.
That was a
communication.
technical difficulty. That was a technical difficulty.
Well,
Thank you, Amy.
thank you.
I got nothing to lose by.
Philip, by completing that, no, absolutely, it doesn't bind either party until it's accepted by both parties, Gordon. So, no, you have absolutely nothing to lose.
Okay, I got it. Nicholas recommended having a lawyer look at it. But
Well, that certainly would be advisable. It's up to you. Yeah,
But it doesn't sound like I got anything to lose. It's not life-saving.
no, it's not, as I said, it's not binding until
Pay a
both parties.
lawyer $1 million to.
Well, yeah,
Well, you know how they.
but it's.
So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And here's something I've been wanting to say for years, and I haven't had the gall to say it, but I will. This has nothing to do with flooding. This is completely off the record. Barre City, for years and years now, seems to have, I won't say money troubles, but you gotta make the budget, and so the school budget doesn't get passed, and on and on and on. Well, I got a surefire way to cure all that. It would give you a lot of money. You wouldn't have to worry about money. What did the big companies do? IBM, GE, Westinghouse, what did all of them do? No more pensions. It's self-input. They knew that. Now, the Barre City, correct me if I'm wrong, you got firemen, policemen, teachers. I shouldn't go too loud, my daughter's a teacher herself, but think of the money you'd pay if you didn't, I mean, they make pretty good salary the 50 years they're working or 40. Do away with their pensions, you'd have all the money you need.
Thank you.
Lawsuits, and the lawsuits would be staggering.
Do enough to do away with it. Now we're on a small budget. Do away with all these pensions, these people, and you'll have all kinds of money.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. We'll talk to you soon. Ellen, did you have something you'd like to say?
Councilor Guston has been waiting
Oh, okay.
and waiting.
I'm sorry?
Councillor Guston has been waiting.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that.
I would just like to state my understanding of what a city buyout process would look like and have perhaps the city manager correct me, just so folks who are listening and hearing city buyout know exactly what that means, because I think that there's maybe at least a little bit of blurriness around that potentially. So my understanding of what a city buyout process is that the options would be executed between the homeowner and the city. The city would have to find the money to purchase and then demolish those homes. That money would have to either come out of our regular budget or through applications for funding beyond, we mentioned earlier, a CDS possibility. At that time, the city would own an empty lot that it would attempt to contract with a developer to replace some kind of building in that place. And we've talked about net gain in housing. Is that an accurate
Generally, yes.
summation of that process? I just
100%.
wanted to spell that all out for folks who are wondering, first of all, what that means, and second of all, why that could potentially take years.
And it is a purchase option, not a purchase obligation. So we sign a document that says, if the city can find the funding, if the city thinks it's a good project, if we can move it forward, then we can choose to exercise the option to purchase. It does not give the seller the absolute right to sell.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure my understanding was correct and that it was stated clearly for people listening.
Ellen Kay, did you have a question or a comment?
I do have a comment. Ellen K, Barre City. It's been heartbreaking listening to this. To think about just these couple of folks who have spoken and multiply that by all of the suffering that's happening here. And I understand the council and everybody is working with what options we have to both mitigate and try to make people whole. And it sounds like we can't come anywhere near that. I'm glad somebody mentioned climate change, because there is more water, there is warmer water, there are bigger storms, and this is our reality now. I want to point out that more than 24 US cities, states, and counties are suing oil companies because of damage caused by climate change. Our cities and towns don't have money for this, and we didn't cause it. So I'm wondering if Barre City would be open to looking at joining some of those lawsuits, because we will be bled dry. I mean, it's what's happening. And the oil companies have known about climate change since the 70s. So there is a movement happening to hold them accountable, because our cities don't have the money, FEMA doesn't have the money, the government doesn't, nobody has the money that it takes to deal with the destruction that is happening now. Fires, floods, all of it. There are entities that have the money, and they're the ones who profited off of this in the billions. So I am suggesting that our city take a look at joining in one of these lawsuits, joining other cities and towns, because that's who's got the money to pay for it, and that's who's profited off of this destruction. And we're cleaning up after it 3 times already in 1 year. So I just wanted to let people know about that. And I'm so sorry for everybody who's spoken tonight and what you're going through. It's very hard to hear it and know it and live in it.
Thank you. Anything else under this topic? Council will move on to 8C. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I wonder if it would be helpful to put something on the city's website that says, here's the new reality. Maybe softer than this, but there is going to be more intense rain events for the foreseeable future. There's going to be flooding for the foreseeable future. There are no miracle cures that we have that we can whip out in the next 6 months. So just so that we're clear with people about, we don't have a solution. We can't do a miracle overnight cure that's going to reduce all the impacts of flooding. It's going to continue. That's the reality of climate change. That's the reality of the way the city is built. And people need to appreciate that. I mean, we can certainly encourage people to do whatever sort of fixes they can make to their cellar and to their places, but the reality is that the city doesn't have any miracles, nor a ton of money, and this is where we are. And we're at the beginning of climate change. We're not at the end.
Thank you. So, I mean, we can certainly talk about that, Counselor, but I'd like to have some options. I mean, there are options. Unfortunately, the resources are scarce. As the manager mentioned, the city will get flood mitigation funds that we can offer to homeowners. There's the emergency management grant that homeowners can apply for. But in terms of, when folks talk about, I'm done, I want you, city, to buy my property, we don't have a whole lot of options. We have FEMA. We need to use that judiciously and within the criteria that the manager and the staff has established. Or we have perhaps a purchase option with the city, and that is contingent upon the city finding even more funds to purchase those properties. So
Yes, I understand
admittedly,
that.
there are not a lot of options out there for
And
folks.
people like Mr. George need to understand that, that he doesn't have, there isn't going to be something that happens within the next 6 months.
I'd be happy to work with you to come up with something that we could put on the webpage and make people available that, are aware that this is gonna be this is a hard path. And it's a path that nobody likes. Council doesn't like it, the manager doesn't like it, and the property owners don't like it. So we'll work on that. Council, we're at item 8C on the agenda. This is the draft flood resiliency plan update. Councilors Wozniak and Guston.
There is a quick PowerPoint rather than going through page by page again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tried to summarize it.
Just summarizing. So the document is also in the packet and is up to reflect.
So if you could go to our first piece, we made some updates and just summarized them quickly here. We integrated the specific projects as named in the EPA Community Change Grant that we've discussed a little bit this evening. We added one piece under infrastructure that is a suggested green procurement policy that recommends the city pursue green options whenever it has the chance to, as a very small, admittedly very small, but a nod towards playing our part in the larger challenge of climate change. Fixed some of the links that have been pointed out in previous conversations, and again, just some more light wordsmithing. So next slide, please.
And sorry, for the fixed links, we just took out the short URLs and put them all in the
I appreciate that, thank you.
So the goal that Councilor Wozniak and I discussed in bringing this to council this evening is to discuss as a council and come to an agreement on sort of what next steps might be to truly finalize this plan. We have all of these things on this list, and the next list are just suggestions. And we would appreciate council feedback, additions, or tweaks to any of these things. And then the idea would be that Councilor Wozniak and I would sort of take point on carrying out to get to a flood resiliency plan for the city that council could formally adopt at a future meeting. So our suggestions for what's next, point first, integrate projects that are identified and we discussed this evening, and August 27 go on those projects. I had put in a note, the historian in me appreciated the photographs and things earlier that the Rivers folks shared. I put in a note writing a timeline of previous flooding response and recovery, just so that we had, as part of this plan, what we had been through. A point of meeting with mayor, councilors, and city officials for direct feedback on specific parts of the plan. We've had council level discussions, but making sure that we are having deep and thoughtful conversations and making sure that's all reflected within the plan, and then also making sure we do that with resident meetings. We've heard many pieces of excellent feedback from residents over the past several weeks, and making opportunities for one-on-one feedback, direct feedback on either a piece or the totality of the plan. Scheduling Oprah's residence forums, we talked about a lot of possibilities for ways to do this. Should they be by theme and section? VCRD has indicated that they have some funding that could help support forums. We talked about, there's a lot of ways we could do this. We would obviously get some city support on the planning and execution of those. Establish appendix with ongoing list of potential projects. As the mayor has said repeatedly, the list is far, far longer than we can tackle in anyone's outlook on either time or money. So making sure that the plan includes an appendix, a sort of parking lot of projects that we have thought about and that could be incorporated into future iterations of the plan. And then the goal for all of this would be, what we're proposing is a plan that council could adopt and then move forward on by the end of October 2024. So I'll pause there and see if there's any feedback on any of these steps that we are suggesting.
Sounds great, and I love the introduction of a timeline.
Thank you.
The one-on-one, would you be better off kind of integrating those one-on-one, we've talked about having neighborhood meetings. So could we do neighborhood the one-on-one, there are a lot of people, we got a small taste of it this evening. There's a lot of people who have a lot to say about their experience in the city's recovery. And so I just wonder, we're looking at partway through August, September, October, so give or take, let's call it 75 days. Would there be time to offer one-on-one resident meetings?
So
It's your time.
Yeah. Well, I'll
It's like, holy cow.
look to Councilor Wozniak as well, but what I was envisioning when I wrote that in was saying, over the next 3 weeks, someone will be at Espresso Bueno every morning from 8 to 9, will buy you a cup of coffee and sit down with us, that kind of thing. And putting a time-limited options for booking something or coming during that time period kind of thing, as to form that piece of it. But I don't know if Councilor, you.
Yeah, we weren't imagining, and just because Amy Galford has a lot of expertise in this, so it might be worth just sitting down with her to do a deep dive about, that kind of stuff. That was more rather than sucking up all of our time doing a million meetings.
Yeah, more an observation than a suggestion.
Yeah.
No, I think this is well thought out. Appreciate your work and look forward to adopting this, understanding that as funding opportunity, it's going to change.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
It's just going to look very different.
So we actually discussed, so.
There are 2 more slides.
Yep, we'll go, so we're pitching as final plan format. Each section of the plan can have an introduction, sort of saying this is what's dealt with in this section and why. Each project will have its own page with description of the project, identified partners. We'd heard the feedback from previous council meetings that it was important to people that we identify what role the city can actually play. Councilor Spalding had identified that earlier this evening with the Trestle project, for example. What can the city actually do? In that case, advocacy. What resources we understand at that moment in time to be needed to carry through that project, and the current status of the project, with the idea that would be updated on an occasional basis to track progress on a particular project. An appendix with completed projects. The front page of that appendix is a checklist. Basically, when a project is completed, it's moved to that section and we have an actual checklist. We have done this. Here's a statement of our progress as we move through. So that's what we're proposing for the plan format. Any feedback on that piece before?
I think that would be great for the residents of the city and for the council, just to have this, here's where we are in this project, here's completed projects. I just think that would give us a concrete way to say, here's where we're moving towards, here's what we've done. I think it would feel pretty reassuring to have that as a document.
Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So in order to sort of get to those, as the mayor said, this plan is going to necessarily keep changing over the years as we move forward as a city. So following adoption of the plan, we're proposing that when we look at this, building out council agendas going forward, that we always make sure that 1 or 2 projects within that plan are scheduled for updates at every council meeting. I think we are likely to be looking at something like that anyway, but using that as a guide, making sure that we are touching each project over the course of like a full year's worth of council conversations and seeing where it is. And then an actual formal plan to review, update, and then revise the plan every 6 months. Either projects get adjusted because the funding hasn't materialized. We need to identify a new funding place, or good news, it's been completed. One of the pieces that we put in is the hydrology study of the city, and we've discussed about moving that forward tonight. So we would update that and then move it to the completed section of the plan, but a formal check-in on it to make sure we are on track with it being a still useful and relevant document every 6 months. So I don't know if anyone had any feedback on the plan for follow-up?
No, I think that's good to have that flow and continuity.
It is to try to strike a balance between, we know it needs to be adjusted and updated, but updating every month is just, it's too much to keep up on.
Could I ask a question? The last time we talked about this plan, we talked about sort of categorizing projects in short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Is that still part of the process?
Thank you for reminding me of that. I think it should be.
Because as I'm sitting here thinking about, Sam, Counselor Stockwell's point about, we should put something on the website about, here's what we're doing. But I wish we could give homeowners, property owners, an idea of what they could do. And maybe it's as simple as, depending on where they are, I'm not talking about necessarily water is pouring into my basement because I am adjacent to the river. But, if someone has flooding because of something happening, maybe they can install rain barrels. Maybe they can do, what are those gardens? Whatever the rain gardens, whatever it is. I think there's an organization will come in and do a review of your property. And so if we could have links for that, just how can we help property owners mitigate, even in the very short term, to get us to the point where our projects are starting to make a difference, the bigger projects.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Yeah. And one of the points of the plan, I forget which section it's under, but is around resident education, and is around providing opportunities to learn exactly what you're describing. And I think we envision the plan as great once we would, in that section, then say, great, we held a workshop on this days, here's the resources that came out of that workshop. So it's a living resource document, even once it gets moved to the quote-unquote completed project. I mean, education is never really completed, frankly, so does that one ever move there is a philosophical question, really. But the idea would be that this would actually be a document that lives and breathes in that way.
Counselor, you had a question or a comment?
No, I was essentially just going to say you're looking for a resource page, Counselor Spalding, on the website for how people can do stuff to help themselves.
Yeah, we could add that in as like, not as a standalone section, but that could be a subsection of this document under like community and staff capacity or information. Yeah.
Yep, that's our last slide. Great. So it sounds like there's general agreement on what we've laid out this evening. So I would say that Councilor Wozniak and I will proceed along the list as we had named it, sort of beginning meeting points. We'll work with the city manager on how city staff can sort of help support resident forums and bring updates on timeline and things that happen as they get planned, and would obviously and of course welcome any other counselors to jump in, work on any pieces of this with us, and we will be making sure to follow up directly as well. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good work. Thank you. So you know how you go through your day and all of a sudden something pops in your head and you're like, oh yeah, I meant to do this. In the minutes, only because this is a serious document, remember I had emailed you and I said the council had authorized the mayor to execute a purchase option?
Oh, that's not
This
the
is what was in our packet. Remember last week, the week, at our last meeting, Nicholas was not here, and we had the purchase option to exercise with Down Street for Wabi Park, and you authorized the mayor, because it's a real estate document, the mayor has to execute those. And then I had emailed the clerk, because I read the draft minutes earlier.
Right, the minutes were corrected, I don't know where.
Oh, okay, but this, I'm just saying, this
version is
was in
not
our
the correct,
packet,
just
and
the
it did
wrong
still
one.
say manager, even though I know you had corrected it. So I just wanted to make sure that got in there, because like I said, it's a legally binding document.
Has been,
Yeah,
was not ratified, it was,
yeah,
it's for next session, so.
okay,
That
cool.
will be all,
All right,
okay.
awesome, thank you. Okay, council, we are at approval of the fiscal year 25 municipal and local agreement tax rates. This is the one that always gives me fit. It's 1 year because we actually came perilously close to approving a tax rate that was incorrect because of a calculation error. So ever since then, I go through it sideways, forwards. I actually do the
I hope
math.
you did.
I double check the math by hand.
This is
And I just
formula
need to
driven.
have the two of you assure me that someone else has checked this
Dawn has
besides
checked this
you.
and triple
So
checked this.
so 4 of us have. And, all right, so Nicholas, why don't you take us through this, or
Well, I can
which,
take you through this.
go for it.
Okay, so for the sake of the municipal tax, we're focusing on the figures that are in the orange highlighted areas. Education tax, that'll happen later when the budget is voted. So looking at the first figure, it's what it is, it's the portion of the municipal funds that need to be raised by taxes, and that is 10 million and some change. And then you have your paving, street construction, voter-approved assistance, that's just, Good Samaritan, you've got your Council on Aging, a few other community entities, as well as the Rainbow Bridge Center. And then you have the voter-approved exemptions. These are exemptions that that you ease the tax for them, like the Good Samaritan, the veterans, anything beyond the first 10,000 the city has to make good. And so you're calculating all those together and dividing that by the 100% rule. So you're moving the decimal to the right. So for the 2025 tax rate, not including the local rate, we have 2.1147. And then you're adding the local, which is the veterans, the exemptions. That local tax rate is the 0.0056, bringing it to a total of 2.1203 for the 2025 year. Adding to that, which is an interim homestead education rate. This is a rate that the state issues us. Right now, it is at 1.3051 for the homestead rate. Adding all of them together, we have a rate of 3.4254. Municipal non-homestead rate, that is issued with the state, from the state as well, and I don't see that one changing. That was what was issued from the state, and it's not really based on the budget. And that is currently at 1.8155. Your non-homestead rate with the municipal, the local agreement would be 3.9358.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
I have a general question about contracts. Some of these contracts look like they were negotiated a really long time ago. Are they periodically looked at? And given the place the city is in, should they be renegotiated? Like, is Reynolds House a nonprofit?
Could we renegotiate it? We likely could. Any contract can be renegotiated. Would we be, I mean, I suppose we could ask, but would we be likely to be successful when?
Well, don't the contracts have some sort of expiration point? A point at which they're
They all do.
renegotiated?
Yeah,
Okay.
any tax stabilization, any agreement has an expiration point. Some are 5 years, some are 10 years. It depends on the size of the project.
Except some of them don't.
I'm sorry?
Some of them don't have an expiration date.
I'm not sure.
There's Spectrum Northeast, that was negotiated March of '97, and then Trustees of the Barre, I don't know what the rest of that is. And then Studio Place Arts, there's no beginning or end date on those last two.
Let's see, beginning, ending. Well, maybe they did Spectrum Northeast, I'm not sure. And Trustees of Berry Lodge, that must be Elks Club?
Probably.
Yes, Elks Club.
And then Studio Place Arts, again, I don't think, so no, on those three, I don't believe there is an expiration date on them.
What's Spectrum Northeast?
That's wireless service? Is Spectrum,
Services.
Spectrum utility?
Oh, okay.
City Manager Strelli Castro, do you think it is worth considering to improve the city's position to renegotiate some of these contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly happy to look at the contracts and see what the terms are. I mean, sometimes most of the times that's spelled out in the contracts themselves. So I don't think there's any harm in seeing what those options may be. But like I said, there may or may not be opportunities based on what the text of the contract say, but I'm happy to see what the options are.
Thank you.
We could stop the pensions.
Now you're thinking.
Okay, so council, we are approving the fiscal year 25 municipal and local agreement rate. Keep in mind, we're not doing the school rate. So the appropriate motion would be to approve the fiscal year 25 tax rate of 2.1147 and the local agreement tax rate of 0.0056.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, question?
Perhaps a little bit pedantic, but a conflict of interest question. My employer is one of the non-taxable parcels on this list. Should I abstain from this? On the non-taxable parcels list, should I abstain from this vote?
No.
I think so.
By statute, they're by either agreement or statute, so it's not anything, well, it may be your employer, it's not anything you have anything to do with.
That was my hunch, but I did want to be very
No, you're
transparent
fine.
about it and check in. Thank
Nope,
you.
you're fine. Any other questions? Yes,
I do.
go ahead.
What's the proportion of non-taxable parcels in this city? Would that be a question anybody knows? Proportion of the budget, or not the budget. What's the proportion of non-taxable parcels that make up the city?
I will tell you it's significant, and I'll get you to the answer to that question.
Thanks. My other question is, do we have a contract with HUD? So do we hold a contract with HUD that says they're going to provide these housing services and that's what the contract is? And in return, we give them the land and there's no contract?
Not aware of it. When you talk about HUD, are you talking specifically about like Barre Housing Authority?
Yes.
So there are certain agreements in place for each of the properties that were developed that dictate how much we can charge them for property taxes. We can get you copies of that.
So there's a formula of some kind?
Yes.
Thanks.
So it's not something that we could, for example, just like with Down Street, you know, when we provide, we know that there's going to be a reduction, you know, Ward 5 school, that project. Big win because that was not taxable at all. But there are,
Well, they do a pilot.
yeah, exactly. And that pilot is by agreement. So when you were asking about HUD and
Yeah.
is there an agreement? Yes, there's always either a formula in statute or some sort of agreement with the city that dictates how much they will be charged, either, again, by formula or agreement for property taxes. Any other questions?
I thought Mr. Councilor Deering had a.
He answered the question.
Any other, nothing? Going once, going twice? All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you very much, council. We are at item 8E on the agenda. We're setting the water and sewer rates. You have that memorandum and briefing.
Thanks.
Who would like to go through that?
I'll cover that one, Mayor. So thank you. I sent you a revised memo, which included the calculations we normally do to show you the impacts on low, average, and high users of the system. So the new memo shows you that the typical low user of the system will see an increase of $12.80 per quarter. A typical average user would be $36.58 per quarter, and a typical high user would see an increase of $60.36 per quarter. And just for reference, that's calculated here by adding the water base increase plus the user range for that system, and then the sewer base plus their usage of sewer. So you can sort of get all the variations of what residents may see in their bills. We kept the increases at the same percentage increase rates as last year. And for water, that's a 3% increase on the base and a 3% increase on the usage. For sewer, that's a 5% increase on the base and a 21% increase on the usage. Recognize, acknowledge these are high, especially on the sewer side. That particular fund continues to be in financial straits, and a lot of that is driving this. One of them is the plan is old. It has a lot of maintenance, deferred maintenance that hasn't occurred that is expensive. We also have we settled an illegal discharge claim last year, and there's an assurance of discontinuance that requires hiring more staff at the wastewater treatment facility. So that by itself is an increase of almost $120,000 to the sewer budget from last year. The Headworks Engineering, which the council has approved those contracts, and thank you for that. That's the key cog to get the plant in better shape. Those are $60,000. The Headworks, as you know, removes grit and rags, and those are things that are just perpetual problems on other parts of the plant. And then this was, an eye opener, but the primary chemical used, which is sodium aluminate, the cost increased, and this is not a mistake, $102,000 and $845. So almost $103,000. So that's an increase in the chemical price and an increase in the required feed rate to maintain our compliance with the permit. So the costs of operating the plant are high. The fund was already at a sort of a structural deficit. That's why we are proposing and requesting the council's approval of these rates, and that's to basically try to almost keep up. If we had to bring you a rate to give us comfort that we wouldn't end the year in a deficit, the numbers would be much higher. This is to help us not fall further behind. So that's the summary here, and I'm happy to answer questions on it. As I said, the real intent here was to help us not fall further behind, especially on the sewer side.
Yes.
Counselor.
Oh, well,
Spalding
you can
was
go
first.
left, right, whatever.
Tell me why we charge the same exact rate for Barre City as we do for Barre Town.
We have an intermunicipal agreement that dictates the rates that we can pay. We can reopen that agreement but that like a contract as well, there's process associated with that. So it is a governed by an agreement.
And how long are those agreements in effect for?
Long time.
Yeah, it's a long time.
The run-up period to terminating the agreement is 3 years.
Yeah.
So if we no longer wish to, we basically have to give them 3 years' notice if we wish to terminate or renegotiate the agreement. I mean, practically speaking, municipalities, it's not unusual. For example, kind of the gold standard cases, the town of Rutland sued the city of Rutland because the city of Rutland proposed to charge the town of Rutland a higher water rate, sewer rate, or both. And the city of Rutland's contention was that they had paid for all of the infrastructure. So all of the infrastructure that ran through the city of Rutland, the city residents had paid for, and then they sold water to the town. So it seemed reasonable that the city would be required to a reasonable return on their investment. And I think the rate at that time was 20 or 25% higher. So that's what Rutland was proposing to charge the town of Rutland, 25% more than the city residents paid. Town of Rutland sued, town of Rutland lost. So the courts have established that certainly in our case, in the city of Barre's case, if we decided that we should be getting a return, and it's a conversation I'm very open to, should the city of Barre be getting a reasonable return on what is, in our case, about a $20 million investment. So it's if you ever want to have the question, let me know. I'd support.
I 100% want to talk about that.
And
Yeah, I mean, I'd support giving the town notice tomorrow. It doesn't mean it's not a war, and it's not, we're gonna extort it's business. It's about, we have a multi-million-dollar investment in, and this goes back to our original investment. Generally speaking, the rates that our neighbors in the town pay, like the manager was just saying, their rate will help pay for that position too. Their increase in rate, just like ours will help pay for those chemicals too. But their rate going way back, they didn't pay back then, so they didn't contribute towards any of the infrastructure. Yes.
a couple things. One is, we had talked about this several years ago, and the agreement was that we wanted to renegotiate because of the obvious.
Right.
And so, yeah, I too want to renegotiate. I had volunteered to help do it because I'll be polite, it makes me really angry. And the other thing is, what's a shame about the water and the sewer is that everything is converging at the same time. Everything is hitting the fan, and we're having to compensate for what we haven't done in the past. And I think you had made the comment about how you'd like to come to council with a budget that really reflects what we have to be looking at if we want to survive, I guess I'd say. And I think we really need to start having those conversations, and those have to go on the website too, because we're sucking air big time, and it stinks.
Well, that's one way to put it. Thank you. So, I mean, I'm amenable to the conversation because it's fair, but I want to be thoughtful about how we have the conversation, because a lot of times you end up, I'm not interested in starting a war. I'm interested in fairness. I'm interested in facts. I threw around 20 million because I know the number is around 20 million. It's not exactly 20 million, but I'm interested in having the facts first. If obviously we have to give notice, and we'll give plenty of notice, and we can have that discussion sooner rather than later. Like I said, it's not a war. It's just about a simple return on what is a really, really expensive investment, and one that we have to keep investing in. Yes.
What would council's next steps be towards giving that notice? Would there be a motion at the council meeting to authorize the manager to begin that?
I think the first step would be, I mean, we're talking about a 3-year notice period. I think the first step, what I would first like to do is just get a copy of the agreement in everyone's hands. So I'm gonna ask the manager to send that sometime this week, have the manager send that to the council so that you can see it, and then it will be very apparent. I think there is, as with any document, some sort of notice procedure. I wanna make sure we get it right. So I'll make sure that you get that. I actually looked at that not long ago. Nicholas sent it to me, so, because I was just thinking that very thing, so we'll get that to you. But in the meanwhile, council, you do need to approve the, if you are inclined, you do need to approve the water and sewer rates as outlined by the manager.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, thank you very much.
Mayor, if I may, I'm just going to pass around a resolution. It is done by resolution, so if you could please sign. I'll start with Councilor Deering.
So you're going to start at that end, so I'll start at this end. We're at round table. Councilor Stockwell.
I'll pass.
Councilor Spalding?
So on the same day as the Heritage Festival, I had the opportunity to go to the BOR and see they were having a box lacrosse tournament championship. I don't know, something. It was very well attended, and I'm once again going to pitch the idea that I think we should have turf year round in the BOR. Let the people start coming with the pitchforks. But these kids were having a blast, and not everybody plays hockey and not everybody skates. And so I would just encourage us to think about how we can make better use of that building. And there were people from all over the state. It was really great. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is just a shout out to our DPW. There was a water main break, like at the corner, like one house away from my house, and they fixed it in record time, I swear, and it was amazing. And I just appreciate, they were there until probably 11 o'clock at night, and they were fast, they were efficient, and I just appreciate how well they work, how fast they work. So thank you.
Councilor Wessizak.
Pass.
Councilor John Bell.
Pass.
Councilor Weston.
Driving over this evening, I heard a note on the radio saying that the Red Cross is advertising a crucial blood shortage. So I'd encourage everyone who is able to donate blood to please make sure that you connect with the Red Cross and do that. They come pretty regularly to Alumni Hall. They're lovely people. I wish I could donate blood right now, but I cannot. So please get out there and do that if you're able to.
Councilor Deering.
Just really want to echo what Councilor Spalding said about the box lacrosse championships. The opportunity that we've had to get turf installed at the BOR, to me, is a game changer. Where we saw a building that sat empty for many months throughout the summer, and now we're seeing revenue being driven into it. But not just revenue being driven into the building, but people being driven into the building, people being driven into our communities to fill our communities in so many different ways. So really just a big shout out to all the many people that were involved in putting the turf down, because it was not an easy task. It took over a year to do, but through many people's hard work, it was accomplished. And I'm just really thankful to see it really paying off.
Thank you. So here we find ourselves again, watching the weather reports. Pay attention, folks. I mean, react, don't overreact. Nicholas and the rest of the staff will make sure, as he said earlier, that the city webpage is updated. Pay attention to the weather forecast. Most of this weather we're going to see is Friday and Saturday. Man,
it's the weekend.
atheist or not, just say a damn prayer. God, just give us a break one time,
Oh,
please.
are we having an executive session?
Yes.
We are having an executive session, and with that, council, I need a motion for findings. We're going to go into an executive session, and we're going to discuss personnel and real estate.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded for findings. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, thank you very much. And now I'll need a motion to enter executive session. The manager will be joining us. We will be discussing personnel and real estate.
So moved. She can have it.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, will be in executive session in just a few minutes.
Yep, same, excuse me.
You can use the bathroom.
Freezing here. It is so cold. I should have brought
Tom. Well. Shit.
Move to come out of,
Are we?
Give me one.
Thank you.
move to come out of executive session.
Second.
Thank you very much. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, council is in open session. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, council is adjourned. Thank you very much, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Nicholas?
Yes.
I wanted to say you did a really good job with that document, you and Teddy.
A call from,
I was going through